Hi everyone, as you can see, this is a compilation, but I just wanted to let you all know that I am actively working on a new video. I've got a new stories video coming out, and I'm trying to figure out what my next case video is gonna be. I know I kind of delved in true crime like recently, and I haven't really done another one, but that is something that I want to continue to work on. The last couple of months have been really hectic. I really can't get into it at the beginning of the video, but it's been a hectic couple of months, and I just wanted to say I'm really sorry for how inconsistent I've been posting. I really am going to try and work harder and just try and be more consistent moving forward. I just wanted to say thank you for your support and for your patience as you wait for me to post. Like I said, this is a compilation. Some of you might not like this. Some of you may enjoy it. Not sure. I know some people like them and some don't. But I am, like I said, working on another video with new, fresh stories that I've never narrated. So just continue to be patient. It'll be out soon. And in the meantime, I hope you enjoy this. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Much love, everyone. A year ago, I was getting ready to get married out of state. Since we didn't feel like dealing with the county clerk for a marriage license out of state, we decided to get married illegally in our hometown. My friend who was supposed to marry us actually committed suicide the week before the legal ceremony. So at last minute, I had asked my friend to marry us and only invited parents. My maid of honor had married us in a park. My other bridesmaid was livid that she wasn't invited. So the day of my legal ceremony, she decided to come to our apartment and destroy the front. She tore apart decorations and had even cut up the wedding jewelry that she was holding for me, throwing it everywhere. She cut up one of my dresses and her bridesmaid dress. Now, the ceremony was 10 minutes, and she was set to be in the big wedding the following week. Things went quiet for a few weeks, until after we got home from celebrating our wedding. She had emailed my mom. Mind you, I'm in my 30s, so that's weird. In the email, she said a lot of heinous things about myself and my husband. Not only did she reach out to my mom, she made 3 TikTok profiles to stalk me, made a video about me, and reached out to my sister spewing lies, as well as texted several of my friends screenshots of the email and threatening to mess with my car. Also mentioning that she had an agenda against me. She also messaged my husband's best friend's wife to try and ruin our friendship and their relationship. She also tried to ruin my best friend's family, even after telling her she has nothing against her and wanted her to be happy. She texted my best friend's husband to spew more lies. My friend has 5 kids, so it's really gross trying to ruin an entire family. 16 relationships she tried to break up. And if we're counting kids, it was a total of 7 kids whose family she tried to break up. The scariest part about this story is that this woman is a doctor, a full-blown physician in her mid to late 30s. This girl had told me that I deserved to struggle after my friend died, and that I could rot in hell. She wrote me false Google reviews, which thankfully I was able to bury. I ended up getting a restraining order because of the destruction of property and the stalking and harassment. But because this girl didn't want to ruin her career as a doctor, she ended up signing a consent order of protection for 6 months. Although I could have taken her to trial and likely won a full order protection. I decided to drop it. She agreed to pay for the tree she ruined. So weeks later, I received a check in the mail, and the memo line said closure, and it had a big smiley face that she drew like a 5-year-old. What she fails to realize is had I not been kind and dropped the order, she would not be a doctor anymore. I've never dealt with such insanity in my life, aside from the time that she verbally assaulted someone to the point that they chased us with their car and nearly got us killed. She actually listens to your channel. So hey girly pop, I hope you have learned to stop being so hateful when you don't get what you want. She's left me alone for the time being, but I won't hesitate to go straight back to the courts and refile if she decides to go insane again. Stay safe out there. Some friends really aren't true friends. So the story really starts when I was 4 years old, but I'm currently a 22-year-old female. I moved to a new neighborhood with my parents and brother. I was playing in the neighborhood when I'd met a girl who we'll call Allie. Allie was my exact same age to the day. Since we shared a birthday, we pretty much instantly connected. I would go over to her house all the time and even went on vacations with her and her family. The weird stuff had started happening at that time when her parents made me pay for things like going out to dinner in a hotel room if we stayed somewhere. And this happened often. And you have to remember, I was a young kid then. I didn't pay much attention to it at that age, but my parents did since they were the ones paying for everything. At about age 12, her mom started doing some sketchy things that I still don't really know about, but my parents just told me I was no longer allowed to hang out with Allie. Many years went by, and we reconnected at age 16, but at the time it didn't really stick, and we lost touch yet again. Right before the pandemic, when we were about 19, is when we met up once again, and we started doing things like meeting up with her sketchy guy friends to smoke and drink and crash on their couches. One day she admitted to me that she had madly fallen in love with one of the guys who we'll call Jack. Jack showed no interest in her, and even told me and the others that he already had a crush on someone else. Allie's solution to this? Cast a love spell on Jack. Because I practiced Wicca, I advised her against it. Whether or not you believe it, it's just not right. But she drove us to the store to buy all of the supplies, and quickly we ran into the woods with the supplies in tow. We put together a heart-shaped jar filled with herbs and crystals like rose quartz and rose petals, and then sealed it with wax. I don't know how, but Jack found out what Allie and I had done, and was reasonably very creeped out. I told him that I advised her against it, but admitted that I had participated and that I was sorry for that. But Allie? She denied everything and blamed it on me. I know how silly this probably all seems, and we all knew at the time as well, but it's the intention behind it. Well, me and the guys ended up excluding her from everything from then on. But her crazy side that she must have gotten from her mother started coming out when she started spreading rumors about everyone in the group to everyone that we all knew. We only found out whenever we would get calls about things, like us cheating on the people we were dating at the time, and just really dumb things like that. One of us actually lost our jobs due to her, so we decided enough was enough. We went over to her house to speak to her, but she wasn't home. Her mom came out and started cursing at us because we were making her daughter's life a living hell. So we had told her mom about all the drugs that Allie had been on, and even that she had started robbing houses. But her mom only called the cops on us. Later on, Allie had tried to reconcile with me by inviting me out to her car that was parked outside my house. I got in, and instead of talking, she then locked the doors and started speeding away. She started crying and yelling at me and driving out of control. She was spewing curse words at me and telling me that I was a little bitch and traitor and that I was so damn selfish. I just kept a straight face and I told her to let me out. She wouldn't. I told her over and over again, but she never did. I ended up calling my mom and I put her on speaker to talk to Allie. She then told Allie that she was going to call the cops if she didn't take me home. I hung up the phone, and while turning around towards my house, she continued to scream things like, "What the fuck was that? You're gonna be a little snitch and call your mom? What was that? What the fuck was that?" But eventually, I did get home safe. Allie then tried to kill me. I was driving to the store, and when I got there, I had went to put on my mask, and I had noticed a very weird chemical smell. I started getting dizzy and I felt so out of it. So I took off the mask and I called my mom. I then noticed that my leather seat had a hole burned into it and my sunroof had been broken into. Luckily from that day on, I never really did hear about Allie again. And all the other boys eventually stopped talking to me when I went off to college. So yeah, that's a short summary of just some things my crazy ex-best friend did to me. I was a naive child without knowing I was. My parents taught me to be wary of strangers, never reveal personal information. They prepared me for recognizing danger, but the danger I faced in this story just wasn't what I was expecting. And the story isn't anyone's fault except the monsters that I'm about to tell you about. When I was a teenager entering high school, I made friends with one of the girls in my year group. And at first, I thought we meshed together quite well. I'll call her Val. Other people told me that she was bad news, but I didn't listen because, like I said, I was naive. She was very loud compared to me, and she could be a little rough, but she didn't seem to mind my quietness and more reserved nature, at least at first. She was also kinder to me when we first met, and she went out of her way to earn my trust. I remember we became best friends super fast, and I stopped putting in so much effort with my other friendships because she just really sucked me in. I didn't realize it, but she went out of her way to create distance between me and my other friends and try to turn me against them. I also noticed she would tell me lies, but the lies were so ridiculous that I naively thought she just wanted to impress me. This incident takes place when we had been friends for about a year. I'd stayed overnight at her house before, and she'd stayed at mine too. On this night, we were sleeping in the living room, which my parents allowed because the walls in our house weren't thin and they were fine with it. I'd asked if we could sleep there because I didn't want to be in my room with Val. Leading up to this, we had had drama between us. She'd done some things that made me feel uncomfortable, and she started to be mean and cold towards me at times. She'd been groping me, then playing it off as a joke, and then laughing at me when I told her not to. She would also sometimes hit or kick me, but in a way where it felt pointless to tell anyone. She didn't leave bruises where anyone could see, and she told me it was just a joke and that I needed to stop being so uptight. Looking back, I think I was an idiot, and it's really hard not to see myself that way, especially because I would never tolerate this shit now. Anyway, I wasn't expecting anything worse to happen, and I was naive, so I stayed friends with her. She would guilt trip me sometimes, threatening to injure herself or end her life if I ever left her, and she even sent me photos of her injured arms when we had an argument once. It was through an old messaging app which probably doesn't even exist anymore. I can't remember every detail leading up to this, but I recall that I was laying on my back on the floor. I had my bed set up, which was 2 blankets and 2 pillows, and Val was on the longest sofa in front of me. It was just past midnight, I think, or maybe later in the evening. I remember that she said something rude to me and I called her out, but I can't remember it anymore since what she said next shocked me so much that it's all I took away from the interaction. She told me, "When you fall asleep, I'm gonna put my fingers up you." Again, I genuinely cannot remember what led up to all this. All I remember is that threat because it shook me. I remember feeling frozen, like my heart was no longer beating, and I felt extremely vulnerable. Despite being on my back, she was far enough from me that if I looked downwards, I could see her face. She was on her phone, and the glow illuminated it, and I remember she looked shocked at herself for saying it. I didn't say a word, because honestly, what do you even say to that? I didn't realize it at the time, but she literally threatened to rape me. I don't know if other people would think this is a big deal, or if it's a weird trauma thing making me think that way, but this interaction really freaked me out. I was scared to fall asleep, and I remember thinking, I want her to go home, but I knew that she had to stay because I didn't feel I could tell anyone what she said to me. I was so scared, but still, I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I remember she put her phone down and she said she was going to sleep. I lay where I was for about an hour until I was sure she was asleep. Then I crept out and into my bedroom. I then put on outdoor clothes. I'm talking jeans and a t-shirt and a hoodie, and then I curled up in a ball in my bed. My bedroom was near my parents', and I put on jeans because I was genuinely terrified she would do something to me in my sleep. I managed to sleep a little, but it wasn't a sound one. I remember the next morning my parents wondered why I was dressed so early, but I just told them that I'd gotten up early, and they didn't think anything of it. I remember that Val asked me why I'd left the living room that night, and I asked her how she knew. She claimed she'd gotten up for the toilet and noticed I wasn't there. I still felt uneasy, but I didn't attempt to address what she'd said because I just didn't know what to say or do. Time passed and she continued to do very toxic things, being mean to me, being violent, and she just continued to grope me. I know people will probably think I'm an idiot for not telling anyone or putting a stop to it, but since we're both females, I didn't know what to do. I had never been through that before. If a boy had done this, I feel like I would have understood it was wrong, but because she was my age and another girl, I just didn't know what to do. She also knew what to say to manipulate me, and all this happened over the span of a long time. It escalated slowly, and as I said, she knew just what to say, and she was normal towards me sometimes. She wasn't always horrible. The next part was the beginning of the end for me. I was at her house and we were sitting on her bed. I can't remember what she was doing. She was on her laptop or something, and I was sitting in the middle of the bed. Again, I don't even know how it happened, but things went further than they'd ever went before. 1 minute she was at the bottom of the bed talking to me while she did something on her laptop or tablet. I forget which. And then the next I was trapped as she got on top of me. There's so much to be said here, but I can't bring myself to say it. She sexually assaulted me, and she enjoyed what she did, and it made me want to cry to see that, to know that. She eventually stopped, but it felt like it went on forever. I didn't even move afterwards. I just kept staring at the object that I zoned in on when it was happening. When it was over, she got up really fast as if I was a snake, and I just felt empty and confused. I felt completely broken and betrayed. I couldn't comprehend what she just did to me. I remember that I wouldn't speak to her. I just stayed in the same position because I was frozen. She told me to leave, and I somehow got myself up and out the door. When I walked home, I felt like I was in a daze. Even thinking back, I see it through someone else's eyes and not my own. I lay in my bed that night and stared at the light coming in through my curtains, which is something I hate. But I felt so horrible that I couldn't bring myself to shut them properly. I just laid there and tried telling myself it was fine and that I wanted it to happen. But I knew I hadn't, and nothing about it was fine. I remember bundling everything I'd worn that day, even my socks, up into a ball and then throwing them into a trash bag. I never wanted to see those clothes ever again. I didn't shed any tears. I went straight into denial and numbness. After this, things were different. I think she was paranoid I'd tell someone, but once she realized I wouldn't, she resumed being her old self for the most part. She didn't grope me as much, but she was still horrible to me. I stayed in contact with her. When I told someone close to me years later about what had happened, they actually asked me why I did that. I told them I didn't know what else to do, and I was in such denial that I thought it would be easier to pretend that nothing had happened. When school finished for summer, I remember blocking Val on social media and blocking her phone number as well. I felt so angry, I couldn't stand to be anywhere near her. I reached a point where I was sick of pretending that nothing had happened, and I felt like I was constantly on fire with the rage and pain I felt. She was apparently confused, but she should have known. I remember she would come to my house and just stare at it from across the street. My parents never saw her do this, but I did, 3 times in fact. When school began again, she'd stand really close to me when no one else was around and try to grope me. We had a class together, and she'd rub my thigh under the table. One time we had this stupid lesson on the dangers of drugs, and we had to wear beer goggles to put us off drinking. I remember she put them on and literally came up behind me and groped me when no one was looking. I remember I had to go to the bathroom because I was literally hyperventilating afterwards. When 2 years had passed, I was desperately needing to talk to someone. It was the hardest call I've ever made, still to this day. I called a helpline, and I ended up wishing that I hadn't. A woman answered the phone, and it took a while for me to say what I wanted. She started off so kind and warm, telling me to take all the time I needed and that she was there to help and would believe me. But as soon as I said something, I felt her hesitation and discomfort, and I felt my stomach start sinking. She asked me if Val had really done what she did, which immediately made me feel like she didn't believe me. I'd literally just told her about the bedroom assault, and her first response is, "Did she do that?" It felt like a shitty thing to say, and I had a bad feeling growing in my gut. I said yes, that she really had done what she did, and the woman was silent for too long, then saying, "Experimentation is pretty normal between two girls. It doesn't mean you're gay." I was shocked, and I didn't know what to say to that. I just opened up and shared something so vulnerable, so difficult and painful, and this is her response? It was her job to talk to victims of sexual abuse, and this is how she was going to respond to me? She went on to give me this big speech about how it sounded like harmless experimentation, and when she said that, I immediately hung up. I felt so hurt. What happened did not feel harmless, and I feel like any sane person would agree. Also, her bringing up sexual orientation really annoyed me, because I didn't say anything about that, so why would she even bring that up? Plus, it's not normal to touch your friends sexually or grope them. I couldn't believe this lady was being so insensitive. At the same time though, her reaction made me wonder if I was being ridiculous for being so bothered by what happened. I told myself again maybe it wasn't so bad, and maybe it really was okay and I just needed to get over it. It took me until I was in my 20s to even have a proper cry about what happened, just because I pushed it down so much. It was only when I told my best friend and one close family member that I could truly begin to deal with what happened. They both told me that it was wrong, and that what she'd done was sexual assault, and that the lady from the helpline was an idiot who had no business being in her line of work. It feels really scary to put this out there, but the reason I'm sharing it is because if there are any other women out there who've had a similar experience, I want them to know they aren't alone. People might not understand, but abusers can abuse as teenagers, and females can be abusive to other females. And if another girl ever makes you feel uncomfortable, please don't ignore that. I knew girls could be abusive to boys when I was younger, but as dumb as it sounds, I didn't expect another girl to be abusive to me. It just isn't something society talks about. It's not your fault, and it isn't okay for someone to touch you without consent, regardless of who they are or their gender. And if someone dismisses you when you speak out, please don't lock the pain inside. Try again to speak up. The world is scary, but you aren't alone. Stay safe, everyone. And remember, it's not ever your fault if something happens. So this happened back when I first moved in with my most recent ex-girlfriend. We'd rented a small apartment in a city that was well known for crime in my country. It was cheap and it was close by to the city center where we both went to university, so it was perfect at the time. However, as stated before, it was also extremely dangerous and run down. For example, homeless people lived in our communal rubbish rooms downstairs out by the car park, and you could probably find a needle or drug bag every square foot of the surrounding area, and not to mention the sounds of police sirens a few times a night. But as I said, it was just a place for the time being. Also, for some context, I'm gay and I'm a girl. I'm average height but quite stocky. Nothing scary, but I was definitely larger than my small petite girlfriend at the time. We went to bed one night and all was normal, and as I'm trying to fall asleep, my ex tells me that she's hungry and she wants a pizza. So she pulls out her phone, sits up, and is ordering herself some Domino's, and she then asks if I want anything. Being tired and it already being almost midnight, I declined, but I told her to be safe when collecting it. I let her know that if she felt unsafe, I'd be more than happy to get it with her. After a few minutes, I drifted off to sleep. The last thing I heard was her tapping on her phone, still ordering. I awoke later on to my phone ringing for some reason. My heart began to beat erratically, and I shot up to grab my phone. It was my ex-girlfriend's name, and she was no longer in the bed with me. Now, I had only been asleep for about an hour at this point, but through my sleepy haze, I managed to quickly answer the phone, and I then remembered that she must have ordered her pizza. My ex was hysterical and scared, speaking extremely fast. "The pizza guy said he's not that far away, so I've come down to wait. And there's a group of men in the car, and they're trying to get me to get inside of it," she cries on the phone to me. I raced to get ready and burst out of my apartment, all while trying to calm her down. She then tells me that they had tried to force her in the car, and they then began ordering her in the vehicle with them, and that they're now laughing at her. As I mentioned before, I'm nothing scary, so I knew I wouldn't have been able to take these men on physically. So as I'm running down to the first set of stairs, I see that the window's open. I tell my ex to come back inside, and she tells me she's in the doorway to the block, meaning I'm just above her. Knowing that she's now safe away from them, I peek out of the large window to then see a black Toyota parked in the do not park area of our car park, which is right by the door. Now, not knowing what else to do, I shout down to them. I'm telling them to back the hell off, and that I'm gonna get all my brothers to go down there, which was definitely a lie. The men weren't sure where I was at first, and I could see them moving their heads around to look. They had their interior light on, and they were all dressed in dark clothes. One of them caught me leaning out of the window and then cursed at me to mind my own business. I had so much adrenaline and anger that I just started to curse back at them, calling them all sorts of names. It wasn't until I just randomly started shouting, "Dad, come over here!" behind me up the set of stairs, and then some random male-sounding name did they start their car and book it from the parking lot. My girlfriend at the time met me halfway on the stairs, and I decided to wait inside by the doors with her for her food. I'm so glad that nothing else happened, and that she managed to get back to the doors in time before anything else went on. The area that my ex was and where the doors were was honestly about 15 feet, meaning she literally was just outside of her home when this happened. Luckily, the doors to that building were thick and metal, and they only required a little fob to get in, and not an actual key, which would have taken a lot longer to open. I just really hope those men never do that to anyone else again. I was all alone in my college apartment waiting for a Saturday night to end. Time was passing slowly, and I just couldn't sleep, so I ate some midnight snacks, but it didn't help. I always took midnight showers on Saturday, and that day I was taking a shower, and I couldn't help but notice the words on my window of my bathroom, and it said, "I'm watching you, and I always will," and it had a heart and a handprint on it. I didn't really pay too much attention to it, and I just went to sleep. Getting ready for my shift the following day, everything went normally. The next Saturday I took a shower again, but this time I covered the window. When I was done taking a shower, I got all dressed and I was about to leave when I then heard a knocking on the window that then got louder by each second, and there was once again another note on the window. It said, "Honey, I love you, and I know you feel the same. Let's make it happen, and with you being next to me, I know we'll be happy." And it had 2 hearts and 2 smiley faces. I then freaked out and ran, and I took my phone to go take a picture of it, just to see if it was real or not, and to report it to the cops. When I got back home after showing it to the cops, it was all gone. I was fairly tired, but I didn't feel like sleeping out of fear, but I eventually did end up sleeping. I had finished all of my college lectures, and I was getting ready for my shift for the next day, I went for my midnight shower, and I made sure that my phone was with me. I eventually finished taking a shower and got dressed, and I was about to leave again, when I then heard the knocking and some creepy-ass voice then whispering, "Annie, are you planning on leaving me alone just like that? Come on, Annie." I then hid in the kitchen, locking the door and making sure I had a knife for protection. I then called the cops, telling them everything, as well as where I was hiding and that I can't come open the door. They said they would send some cops right away. I then realized that I didn't get a good look at the picture I took, or even really read what was on the window, and I was absolutely shocked when I opened it. It said, "Please, give yourself to me already. My love, I'll treat you like a princess. Submit your body, heart, and soul to me." And it had 3 hearts. The cops arrived within minutes, and they kicked down the doors. 2 cops escorted me outside my apartment, and they then stayed with me for safety. I was so scared that I was shivering when one of the cops tried to comfort me. Minutes later, the cops came out of my apartment, and they had actually found a man hiding in my apartment. As it turns out, I had a creepy neighbor who was my stalker. He had some weird notion that we were going to be together, and I had to take him to court and get a restraining order. After everything that happened, I had to move out of that apartment and get the hell away from there. I haven't seen the guy since, and I really pray and hope I don't ever see him again. I'm a 19-year-old female, but during the time of the story, I was around 13 to 14. I live in a small county in Pennsylvania, and this happened during the time when I was in middle school in October. It was any normal day, and me and my younger sister had just come home from school, and during that time I had a pet bird. Since I knew that it was cold outside, I decided to take my bird outside with me for one more time before the weather became too cold. I had told my sister that I was taking the bird outside, and she said okay while she stayed inside. For some background information, me and my family lived in an apartment, and we could see people's balconies in front of our balcony since we lived in the very end of the apartment complex. But right behind our apartment building was another road, so we weren't completely isolated. And in between the apartments was a small wooded area / forest. This will be important for the story later on. So I grabbed my bird and I took it to the grass between the apartments since there was an open free space for my bird to walk around. It was a pretty quiet area, and there was a really good breeze that day since it was during the fall season. It was also close to Halloween since all of the people's balconies were decorated with scary decorations. My bird was casually walking around, and I was aware that we were getting closer to the woods, but I made sure that I was from a good distance since I hear scary stories all the time, and I usually hear that bad things occur in the woods. We were there for a good 10 minutes, and I kept all of my attention to my bird, since he's really afraid of anything. When all of a sudden, I heard a weird squeaky noise, and it wasn't just any squeaky noise. It was the kind of noise of when a clown honks its nose or horn. This was also during the time when the clowns were out and would lure kids to the woods. I knew that it was coming from the woods, and I quickly turned my head towards the way I heard it coming from, but I didn't see much else other than the trees and leaves. I was quite alarmed, and I began looking around to see if maybe it was one of the people's Halloween decorations going off or something, or maybe someone was watching a scary movie and they left their balcony door open. But no, I didn't see anything like that would make that sound. Then, what I heard next gave me the absolute chills. While I was looking for an explanation of the noise, I heard a childlike chuckle coming from out of the woods, and for one last time, I again heard the clown squeaky noise. I didn't even bother looking into the woods. I just quickly scooped in my bird and ran back to my apartment. I luckily brought my key with me, and I quickly unlocked the door and ran into my apartment. I put my bird back into his cage, and I slowly walked to my balcony since I had a good view to see the woods. I luckily didn't see anybody or anything, but I was very frightened and was just really glad that I made it back to my house safely. I know this isn't the scariest story, and technically nothing bad actually happened to me, but I still often think about this day and wonder who or what made that noise. Hi everyone. I want to give a trigger warning that the story does contain animal abuse. The story happened around Christmas of 2021. For some backstory, my apartment complex uses smart locks, so rather than having a key to unlock the door, you just type in a code and the door will unlock. However, there is still a manual keyhole, just in case the battery on the lock dies or something like that. About a week and a half before Christmas, the keypad was having issues with turning on, so I couldn't unlock the door. So I put a service ticket to the complex, and they had someone come out the next day to replace the lock. During that time, I was talking to the maintenance guy, and he seemed really chill, and we were having a really good conversation. However, he kept glancing over to my Christmas tree that had a bunch of presents for my family members, which still needed to be wrapped for Christmas. Some of the items were really expensive, like electronics and things like that. Also, during the conversation, he would repeatedly say things like, "Man, I really wish I could afford an apartment like this, especially for your age." Now, I'm 20 years old with a successful e-com business, so I guess you can say I can afford nice things. I always just laugh it off when people say things like that. He finishes replacing the lock and leaves. Also, I have an Australian Shepherd. Anyone that has experience with that dog breed knows how smart and loyal they are. They're also very protective of their person. Her name is Opal, and she's never shown any aggression to any stranger or anyone ever. She really loves getting attention from strangers whenever I take her out. Even when the maintenance guy was over, she was really nice to him and just kind of letting him do his thing. Before we get into what happened, the apartment complex I live in has cameras in the hallway outside of the apartments, as well as the smart lock that automatically locks after being unlocked for 30 seconds. As well as I check the lock every night, so I know the door was locked before going to bed. Well, fast forward a few nights after the maintenance guy replaced the lock. Me and my girlfriend were sleeping. My dog sleeps on my side of the bed with me watching the door. Now, in the middle of the night, I awoke to her making small little barks, all while looking at her open bedroom door. I'm a light sleeper, so most noises tend to wake me up. I told her to be quiet, and I tried to go back to sleep. A few seconds later, there was another loud noise from the living room area, and my dog then bolted off the bed and ran out of the room. I chased after her to see what the noise was. Shortly after, I had heard a guy then scream, and as I turned on the living room lights, I saw that my dog had sunk her teeth into a man's arm by the Christmas tree. I instantly knew that it was the maintenance guy. He had a mask on, but I just knew it was him. Before I could react, he had pulled a knife out of his hoodie pocket, and he stabbed my dog right in the shoulder. She let go of him, and he then ran out of the apartment. I didn't try chasing after him because he had a knife, and I was just worried about my dog at this point. By this time, my girlfriend had gotten out of bed, and we had to rush my dog to the car on the way to the animal ER, and we were also on the phone with the police. There was a lot of blood from her stab wound, but they managed to do surgery, and she was able to make it out of this alive. There was actually enough proof to press charges on the guy, because the guy had put his mask on right outside of my door, and my camera saw his face. They also saw that he had entered the apartment with a key, which only the residents of each apartment and the maintenance man have that, which was him. He had also brought a really big garbage bag with him that night to take all the Christmas gifts. He ended up receiving a 5-year sentence in federal prison. I'm a firm believer that dogs can smell a person's intent, and I will be forever grateful to my dog, as well as the Australian Shepherd breed. Who the hell knows what would have happened if I didn't have that dog and I walked out to him stealing the gifts. He had a knife, so you never know. Remember to be safe around the holidays, and if you ever have a stranger coming over to your home for whatever reason, make sure they can't see the gifts under the tree. Be safe, everyone. For some context, I was born in Moscow, Russia, and I'd moved to the US when I was 9 years old. The apartment I lived in was really creepy and old, post-Soviet Union. The apartments aren't like they are in the US. They're about 5+ stories high and wide. The apartment complex can be accessed by a security code unique to each complex. This was a really bad part of town, and a lot of bad things happened. A great deal of traumatic things went down in my childhood. But this, well, it has to be one of the ones that scarred me the most. It was a true wake-up call for my parents to move. It was a normal day. I was 8 years old at the time, having a lot of fun with my childhood friends. Little did I know, my friends and I were playing tag when suddenly I heard someone scream "Help me" from one of the apartment buildings. I then stopped dead in my tracks. Did you hear that? Someone was screaming "Help me." While I said that to my friends, another scream cut me off, and we all just looked at each other. We weren't scared just yet. This was a bad part of Russia, and again, a lot of bad things happened here. I just thought it was another drunk woman going crazy. So I continued playing along with my friends. Not a minute later, I heard yet again another bloody scream. And again, all of my friends and I just look at each other. There's a blonde woman who ran out of my apartment building. She had a white dress on and it was stained with blood. The first thing I saw was her face, pure with terror and crying. I noticed that she was clenching her stomach. I looked down, and I really wish I hadn't. There was a kitchen knife stuck in her stomach. Her white dress was stained, with all of her blood dripping down on it. I was so focused on the knife that I didn't even notice a tall, dark-haired man running out of the building chasing the woman. By now, all of the kids were standing there in shock, watching the guy chase the bloody woman. She wasn't very fast, considering she had a knife in her stomach and was literally dying. The man caught up to her pretty quick. He punched her in the face, and she fell on the ground. The man then took the knife out of the stomach and stabbed her again and again as she just laid there unconscious from the punch. And as fast as he came, he left. He just got up and ran away as if he didn't just murder someone. At this point, me and my friends are all just stunned in silence. My eyes can't get off this dead woman. It felt like it was forever, and I was just staring at her dead empty eyes staring at the sky. I ran away crying to my mom. My mom made me stay inside for the rest of the day. I watched out of my 5th-story window as more and more cop cars and ambulances came to my block. This experience truly traumatized me. Obviously, I wasn't the one harmed in this, but mentally, it was death. I'm still holding on to the guilt that I didn't do anything about it. I later found out on the news that this was a domestic violence case. The perpetrator was her husband, and he was caught. He's now spending the rest of his life behind bars. Apparently, he was an alcoholic. On that day, he just lost it. The woman's first scream of "help me" was from him hitting her. And when she tried to fight back, that's when he grabbed the knife and stabbed her in the stomach. She got out of the apartment with the knife in her stomach just to still be killed. She was a true fighter. She really wanted to live. This case could have been so preventable. There were so many domestic violence calls to their apartment building, but the corrupt Russian police never did anything about it. So to that deranged alcoholic murderer who killed his wife right in front of me and my friends, let's never meet again, and I really hope there's a special place in hell for people like you. So picture this. It's about 4 in the morning. One of those cold, damp London weekdays where the air feels heavy and clings to you. I'd fallen down a video game rabbit hole, surfaced hours later, and I realized 2 things. 1, it was obscenely late, and 2, I'd completely forgotten to eat dinner. A quick, desperate scan of the kitchen confirmed the worst. Nothing. Damn it. My only hope was the 24-hour McDonald's drive-thru down the road. It's maybe a 10-minute walk, mostly through quiet suburban streets that feel almost unnervingly still at that hour. Coat on, I headed into the pre-dawn gloom. Habit took over, and I immediately stuck in my earphones, scrolling through my phone to catch up on the messages and notifications I'd blissfully ignored for the past several hours. In hindsight, I know exactly how that looks. Headphones in, face lit by a phone screen, completely oblivious to the world at 4 a.m. Prime target material, basically. I was about halfway there when I had registered movement just behind me. I glanced back. There was a guy swallowed by an oversized hoodie riding a bicycle. Except it wasn't a normal bike. It was painfully obviously a child's pink bicycle. The tiny frame looked ridiculous underneath him. He wasn't going anywhere specific, just doing slow wide loops on the empty street, always ending up slightly behind me. Now, I've lived in London for about 3 years. You see weird stuff. It's part of the background noise. My default programming kicked in. Head down, keep walking. Don't make eye contact. He'll get bored eventually. You know, standard operating procedure for navigating the city's low-level strangeness. But then he wasn't behind me anymore. He smoothly cycled up right alongside me, matching my pace. The ignore it strategy suddenly felt very thin. He was muttering something. It was clear he wanted my attention. Reluctantly, I pulled out one earbud, still walking, trying for casual indifference. My automatic defense mechanism fired off before I even properly heard him. "I'm sorry, I don't have any change." That's when I made the mistake of actually looking at him. He wasn't asking for change. His eyes locked onto mine, and there was a hard, focused intensity there that immediately set off alarm bells. My gaze flickered down. His right hand was shoved deep into the front pocket of his hoodie, pushing the fabric outwards. Oh, it wasn't a slow dawning realization, more like a sudden plunge into ice water. The casual weirdness evaporated, replaced by cold, sharp-edged fear. That's when I properly registered his words, spoken low but clear. "Give me your phone." My feet kept moving, seemingly on autopilot, but the rest of me felt frozen. My brain felt like it was buffering, trying to process the demand against the very real possibility of what was in that pocket. Is he bluffing? Is that a knife? Is this phone I literally just got and definitely can't afford to replace, worth getting stabbed over? The mental calculus was frantic and terrifying. We were still moving forward side by side in this bizarre, terrifying mobile standoff. Me staring straight ahead, hyper aware of him right beside me and my mind racing. And then a sound. The distinct rumble of a car engine growing louder. Headlights swept across the end of the street, illuminating the junction just yards ahead. A brief moment of blinding light. I shot a look back at the guy on the tiny pink bike. The thought flashed. Run! Make a break for the car, for the light. But before the thought could even translate into action, he abruptly swerved. He pushed off hard on the tiny pedals, cycling rapidly down the street, disappearing back into the shadows as quickly as he'd appeared. I just stood there for a second, heart hammering against my ribs. Then the next thought hit me. Crap, I still have to walk home. Needless to say, the McDonald's craving vanished instantly. On the way back, the headphones stayed off, and my phone stayed deep in my pocket, clutched in my hand. I also gave the quiet suburban streets a wide berth. Instead, I took the long way round, sticking to the main A road. It's noisy, choked with fumes even at this hour, and the pavement is basically a narrow, neglected strip inches away from speeding traffic. It felt horrible, but infinitely safer. The constant stream of headlights, the drone of vengeance. It was unpleasant, but it was a presence. Company of a sort. Thankfully, the rest of the walk was uneventful. No more unexpected cyclists emerged from the dark. But yeah, I'm just really glad that it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Guy on a tiny pink bike at 4 a.m. demanding my phone. Hopefully I don't ever encounter you again. It was July 2011. I had just turned 21 and was living in the Piedmont region of North Carolina. Dating apps were still in their infancy, and I found myself gravitating towards Craigslist personals. It was raw, anonymous, and wide open, each post a gamble. Users would write short ads with vague descriptions. Sometimes they included a blurry photo. Most of the time, it was just a few bold sentences dangling mystery and danger. Young and naive, I wasn't looking for love, just a quick, exciting connection. I responded to one listing that immediately caught my eye. A woman replied almost instantly, which both surprised and excited me. Our chat started off innocent enough. Greetings, interests, light flirting. But soon, we were diving into fantasies of what we might do if we met. It was PG-13, at least for that era, and I was buzzing with adrenaline. After about 30 minutes, she asked for a picture. I sent her a selfie and requested one in return. What I received was a woman who looked to be in her mid-40s. She had shoulder-length blonde hair, hazel eyes, a warm smile, and breasts that seemed designed to scramble in the mind of a 21-year-old boy. Her body wasn't toned, but she appeared healthy, normal, like someone's attractive suburban mom. I was hooked. Then she asked, "Are you generous?" I didn't know what she meant. Generous how? Time, compliments? But I didn't want to sound dumb and risk ruining the moment. So I answered, "Of course I am." She then responded with, "Perfect," then gave me her address. She lived about 30 minutes away from me. I told her I'd head out right away. She replied, "Great, I'll get ready for you." The drive was a cocktail of excitement and nerves. I couldn't believe my luck. The idea that a woman like her wanted to meet me, just some skinny guy from the area, felt so surreal. But the closer I got, the quicker my confidence evaporated. The houses grew more run down, the yards cluttered with discarded furniture and trash bags. Streetlights flickered over cracked sidewalks and shuttered windows. I told myself not to judge her by where she lived. People fall on hard times, right? Still, the butterflies in my stomach started swarming into something darker. I arrived at a 2-story house. It wasn't as dilapidated as the others, which gave me a sliver of hope. I surveyed my surroundings carefully, marking anything that felt off. The street was quiet, no voices, no movement. Just the hum of distant traffic and the occasional bark from a dog down the block. Before getting out, I had all of my belongings in the car so there'd be nothing tempting to steal. I carried only my phone and more shoes I could run in just in case. I climbed the steps and knocked. A woman's voice answered from inside. "Come in." The door creaked as I entered, and my senses were immediately assaulted. The inside was absolute chaos. Newspapers stacked to the ceiling, crusty takeout containers balanced on shelves, boxes stuffed with random junk, and cereal spilling all across the floor. The smell wasn't overpowering, but carried the unmistakable scent of decay. Straight ahead was a staircase leading to the second floor. To the left, a living room bathed in flashing TV light. A tall man sat on the couch, arms stretched across the backrest, staring at the screen like he was waiting for something, or someone. A chill ran through me. Who was he? Why didn't she mention anyone else being here? I called out, "Hey, where are you?" Her voice answered again, soft and sultry, this time from a room down the hallway. The man never once turned or spoke, just kept watching the screen like a silent gatekeeper. I moved cautiously, weaving through the towers of trash and grime. The hallway narrowed with debris, and the air grew heavier with each step. I peeked into the doorway and just froze. There she was, but she wasn't the woman from the photos. This woman was large, massive even. Her greasy brown hair hung limp, and the top of her scalp was patchy. Her face bore uneven makeup, with a few prominent moles barely masked. When she smiled, I only saw a handful of teeth behind streaks of red lipstick. She sat on what I assumed was a queen-size mattress, though most of it was buried under the trash. Her breasts barely sat inside a sheer-stained nightgown. They hung to her knees as she sat wide-legged, motioning for me to come closer. But what truly turned my stomach wasn't her appearance. It was the environment. The bed she sat on looked molded, collapsing beneath her weight. Roaches scurried out from the mounds of trash she shifted to make space. The room was a biohazard. She gestured for me to sit beside her. I took one hesitant step in, still unsure how to exit without escalating things. She asked, "What would you like to see, dear?" while fondling herself. Then she said, "So, how generous are you going to be tonight?" Confused, I asked, What do you mean exactly?" She giggled. "How generous are you going to be with your payment?" Suddenly, it clicked. Generous was code. This wasn't a hookup. This was a transaction. I began backing out of the room, apologizing profusely. "I'm sorry. I didn't understand. I didn't know this was that kind of arrangement." I was halfway down the hallway when the man from the couch stood up, now blocking the door. I felt the walls closing in. He was huge, easily 6'8", broad and unmoving. Behind me, the woman stormed into the doorway. "You wasted my time and you're not even going to pay for it?" she hissed. The man crossed his arms and spoke in a voice like steel. "It's either you pay for the time you wasted or I'll take the payment from you, little man." Fear pulsed in my chest. I was alone in a strange house, cornered. I had no backup, but then I thought of a way out. I stood tall. Well, as tall as a 5'5" guy could at 120 pounds. I then said, "If you really think I came out here without telling someone where I'm going, you're absolutely stupid. I told my friend before I left to expect a call within 45 minutes. If they don't hear from me, they're calling the cops." He squinted at me. "You're bluffing." "You sure you want to take that gamble?" I said, pointing toward the window. "Because I smelled weed from the sidewalk, and the cops will too. You let me walk out right now and I'll forget this ever happened. But if you make this hard, you'll have 2 squad cars parked here in less than 10. Dead silence followed. Then the man turned to her and shrugged. "Look, this one's not worth it. Don't you have someone else coming later on?" She nodded, and without another word, the man stepped aside. I didn't wait. I walked out that door calmly, controlled, never turning back, never saying a word. I got in my car and drove off. The moment I was out of sight, I screamed. Relief, shock, anger. I was lucky, and I never went on Craigslist again. The story happened roughly 15 years ago, and I just had to share it. Now that the company is dissolved, I shouldn't get into any trouble for sharing. I used to work for a company that built cars. I won't name the brand name or its location for privacy reasons. I worked in the finishing 2 department. Now, it's important to know the layout of our department. In our department, the actual frame of the car would be brought through on a massive assembly line. We had 3 lines in our department each for a different make of vehicle. There were 2 high pots on each line. These high pots were massive, probably the size of a pole barn and basically a building within the building. The first high pot on each line was a giant washer that would spray the unpainted frame down with silica, which is a very toxic chemical many factories use at a boiling 500 degrees Fahrenheit. This was done to clean off any impurities in the frame, and the sicko made the paint stick to the frame better. After leaving the first high pot, it would go to the second one where the frame was dunked, flipped over, dragged, and pulled out of the giant pool of paint by a robot, and then sent down the line after going through the dryer. Anyway, these high pots have certain safety features on them. One being if you open a door while it's running, it trips the e-stop and sets off the alarms. However, the machine has to be stopped from the outside before the doors to it will unlock, and there's no stop button inside them. This will be important later. Anyway, we had this supervisor named Christy, and let me tell you, she was a bitch. Christy was a redhead in her 30s who didn't really care about anything. I literally heard her tell someone, "Look, I don't care if you have a heart attack and die." Yeah, she's that kind of person. She didn't really bother me too much. However, there was one employee over at the other high pot line that she had it out for. Armando. Armando was a Mexican guy in his 40s who had apparently immigrated to the United States only 4 years prior. He had been working there for roughly 1 year at this point. He was quiet, but he did a good job. Christy wouldn't leave him alone though, and whenever she thought nobody was listening, she would walk by him and just make really awful comments. One day I heard her walk by him and make an awful joke that I won't even repeat here. Little did she know this would set Armando over the edge. Later that day, I was running my line when I heard the alarms for the high pot washer on Armando's line go off. It probably just faulted out again, which actually happens regularly to all of our equipment. I didn't think much of it and just went back to my own line. 10 minutes later, I hear the alarms go off again, this time in a different tone, signaling the high pot is starting up. Then I hear screaming. Christy's muffled screaming. I look over and I see Christy in one of those plexiglass windows of the high pot washer screaming and banging on the door as the hot sicka is being sprayed on her. I then look over to Armando and I'm expecting him to hit the e-stop or do something. But he doesn't. He just stands there watching with his arms crossed. I quickly run over the walkovers that cross over the conveyors. I have to cross 3 of those to get in his line, which takes about 1 minute. I run over to the control panel and press the e-stop, which unlocks all the doors on the high pot washer and sets off the alarms as well. Christy stumbles out of the access door to the high pot, and I'll never forget the horrifying scene of flesh melting away from her bones and blood beginning to ooze out that awaited me. Eventually, paramedics arrived and Christy was taken away, and Armando was taken away in handcuffs by the police. Apparently what happened is Armando stopped the washer and then just walked away. When Christy noticed it was down, she came over to investigate, and then went inside it as well when she didn't see Armando around. Armando then shut the door behind her and locked it and then started it back up again, spraying her to death with scalding hot sicka. Apparently he was so sick of her harassment, and apparently HR had done nothing about it, that he just finally snapped. Armando was actually sentenced to life in prison for this, and Christy ended up dying from her injuries. OSHA began an investigation. However, the company went bankrupt 2 years later before the investigation was even finished, and the building was eventually demolished. I still think about that to this day, and I can't imagine a more horrifying way to die. I've been working at the same law firm in New Orleans for almost a year. I'm a fresh young female attorney who primarily works in Sub-Box 1 mass torts lawsuits. As of lately, things have been fairly unsettling at the workplace. What makes it worse is that nothing's being done. I want to keep my job without causing issues, but there's a man working here who makes it incredibly hard. His name is Anthony, and he's a black nerdy paralegal who I assume is in his early 30s. You can say that I brought this abuse upon myself for being overly friendly with him, but I'm just that way with everyone. This all began back in November when Anthony had really first started communicating with me. He came off as distant at first, but then he would always wave and stare at me. He would also do this strange salute type of gesture whenever he would see me. Nothing too crazy, but in hindsight, it is a little weird. He would always be at the office very early and would hang out in the kitchen making the coffee. I came in early one day and decided to grab a hot cup of joe. Anthony was in the kitchen. I smiled and said hello, and he just stared at me while I worked on making my own cup of coffee. I had trouble reaching a cup until I saw his hand reach up and grab it for me. He then talked to me for a little bit. He was very awkward and tended to sweat a lot. My guess was that he was just nervous. He then told me if I ever needed a hand with grabbing things out of reach to shoot him a team message. I laughed and got to work. As time went on, I noticed he would do very awkward and strange things like stand there awkwardly in silence whenever I was chit-chatting with the other coworkers. I began to tell myself that he might just be a little on the spectrum and that he was just probably completely harmless. Our Christmas party is usually the first weekend in December, and our firm goes all out for us. Our first night is a cocktail hour. The second is a formal dinner, and Sunday's a day of fun activities all around the city, all events paid for by the firm. That Friday at work, everyone was hanging out, opening bottles of wine, beer, and booze, and just enjoying each other's company. I noticed Anthony kept hovering around me as he tends to do to select people when we were all in the same room for whatever reason. I was staying sober for the night because I didn't want to get sloppy at my first Christmas work event and be that guy. I noticed it ended up just being me, Anthony, and a coworker of ours, Melanie, at a table eating together. Melanie was probably in her mid-40s, a little older, but a very pretty and kind woman with a southern accent. We were both laughing at Anthony and how he was acting a little over the top for his usual calm self. He would talk loudly and say little things while jumping up and being very animated. He was sweating profusely while doing so as if he were on drugs or something. It was kind of like watching Chris Farley, but way less funny and more awkward and concerning. Although it was awkward, Melanie and I were still laughing to be nice. Anthony went to the bathroom and Melanie started to gossip. "You know, he seems nice, but he kind of gives me the creeps," she said. She told me how uncomfortable it makes her when he stands behind her and then says nothing and just slowly walks away. She said one time she swore that he was following her home in his car, but it was hard to tell because she said his car stopped at the end of her street. I laughed and just told her something like, "You know, I think he's just a little under the umbrella. Anthony is harmless." "I mean, are you sure it's him?" The mood of the conversation then got a little more serious. She looked me dead in the eyes and told me, "Girl, I've been working my whole life in these types of environments. Do not give a man like that any reason to think you're easy to walk on, because it'll be a stray dog situation and no one will believe you." I brushed it off and I kind of just told myself that Melanie was probably racist. Little did I know I was really giving food to a stray dog that just wouldn't go away. As the workday began to fade into the pregame before cocktail night, I thought maybe it was time to go home and get ready for the event. As I was walking out of the office, I saw Anthony sitting on the curb. He very obviously had too much to drink and he looked a little bored sitting on his phone. "Hey man, what's up?" I said. He looked at me with a grin and said he lived an hour and a half away and was just going to kill time before the cocktail event. "Are you gonna meet up with friends?" I asked. "No, I'm just probably gonna sit here and play on my phone, but it might die." I felt very bad for him at the moment and felt like I almost needed to do something nice. "Well, I live a few blocks down the road. Why don't you come hang out with me at my apartment while I get ready?" I asked, hoping and expecting that he would say no. "That sounds pretty cool," he said. I cringed as we walked to my car. The ride there wasn't so bad. He just talked a lot about video games, Magic the Gathering, and other nerdy stuff that I wasn't really familiar with. I just pretended to be interested. When we got to my apartment, my roommate wasn't home, but luckily I kept a baseball bat right under my bed in case anything weird happened. I told him we had a few seltzers and beers in the fridge, and that he could help himself if he would like while I took a quick shower. While I was showering, I just kept thinking how stupid I was for getting myself into this. He was so weird and awkward. What if Melanie was right? What if he did stalk her? And then out of my peripheral vision, I saw him. I usually tend to gaslight myself into thinking I'm crazy. but this time I knew what I saw. It was a flash of light near the bathroom door and a familiar flashing light. It was 100% an iPhone camera flash. I waited and then peeked out of the shower and saw nothing. I just stood there paralyzed in fear. I told myself he didn't get a picture of me, but I need to think of an emergency plan to get him the hell out of my house as calmly as possible. I hurried and got dressed as fast as I could, but then went out to speak with Anthony. "Oh man, you're not gonna believe this. My cousin had an emergency and needs me to go pick her up right now," I said. I didn't hear a response, but when I went to my room, Anthony was laying on the floor and appeared to have drunk at least 7 beers. What? He said as he laid there completely hammered. "She doesn't feel so good." "I had too much to drink." "Bro, did you just chug like 6 beers in 10 minutes while I was in the shower?" I knew that I had gotten myself into a real pickle and I was screwed. I couldn't tell if he was actually drunk or faking, but he wouldn't get off the floor of my bedroom. "Anthony, dude, come on. You've got to get it together. I have to go." He just laid there and began to act like he was falling asleep. I went into the living room and pretended to call my cousin to let her know that I wouldn't be coming to help her. I sat in my living room in disbelief. What the hell do I do? Leave him here? Hang out with him here? I did not sign up for this. I just wanted to be nice. I did my makeup and decided that I would wait in the living room to see what he did after a couple of hours of sleeping in my bed. An hour went by until he got out of my room. He seemed totally fine, and we watched Netflix until it was time to head to the holiday work event. "Dude, I didn't know you liked to drink that much," I said. "You totally owe me more beer." He looked disappointed and told me he struggled with alcohol for years, and he treats it as a coping mechanism to deal with never knowing his father. Then he began to cry, as if this night couldn't get any worse. I have a big drunk weirdo coworker crying in my living room about his dad. I was texting my roommate the whole time, and we came up with an idea to leave him at the work event while he came and picked me up to go do something else. My roommate is a young guy named Connor, and we really have a great sibling type of relationship. I'm thankful he was able to help me slip out of this crappy situation. When Anthony arrived, I realized how weird it would look for us to show up together, so I asked him to just go inside while I made a phone call. "No thank you, I can wait for you," he said. I acted like I was calling someone and they didn't answer. When we walked in, everything was pretty fun and exciting. I don't think anyone even noticed we walked in together. Anthony finally got away from me. It was a real relief as I went off and talked to coworkers that were actually my friends. At one point in the night, I would start to see Anthony pop up again and again though. I then began to notice him looking at me and pointing when he was talking to people. This made me uncomfortable. Then a woman attorney who I really admired came up to me and asked if I was okay. I lied and said yes, and she just stared at me blankly and then bluntly said, "Look, Anthony is saying the two of you are dating." My heart sank. What the fuck? No! That is the furthest thing from the truth, I said. I walked over and confronted him. He could barely stand and shouted, "Hey babe!" He reeks of liquor and was spitting with every word that left his mouth. "I really like this song. Can we dance?" I told him he needed to get an Uber home, stop drinking, and relax. He was being insanely loud and it was making a scene. I walked out and went to a bar down the road until my roommate came to pick me up. My roommate and I met up at a bar and hung out while I explained to him what was going on. After about an hour, Melanie called me. "Hey girl, we're all leaving the cocktail hour, but we noticed that Anthony's in your car." "What?" I said. "Girl, yeah, he's in your car laid out in the seat naked." I stood up from where I was sitting and I told her to bang on the car and make him fucking leave now. She then said, "There are about 12 coworkers outside of your car right now trying to get him to open the door." I told her to please ask everyone to just carry on with their night, and then my roommate and I were heading over to handle this. When we arrived, my car was fine. No Anthony, nothing weird, just my car parked. I went home that night with no issues, but was fucking terrified that he knew where I lived. He didn't show face to the holiday dinner, but I did. A few of the folks were pretty spooked about what had happened the night before. We all agreed to talk about this to someone in management on Monday. Monday came, and I kid you not, no one would vouch for me besides Melanie. The other attorneys and coworkers who I trusted all acted like they didn't even remember or thought it wasn't as bad as it had seemed that night. Oh, come on now. We all had a lot to drink. He's a weird guy and probably just didn't realize he was in your car. He had his clothes on in your car. You aren't remembering correctly. Our operations manager attorney refused to believe us. This is a man's career at stake. I can't just fire him without any proof. Melanie is a rumor starter and she has something against Anthony. Are you sure you didn't just sleep with him and now you're embarrassed? He said the two of you dated, is what they told me. Since the incident, he has sent love notes to my address, called my cell phone from private numbers and would breathe on the line, and he's followed me home from work twice. Nothing has been done, but I'm in the process of getting his sorry ass fired. I just didn't know it would be this hard. For the record, I actually tested sliding my phone under the bathroom door, and it could 100% get a clear shot of the bathroom. I guess to start off, my life up to 2005 was pretty traumatic and heartbreaking. That being said, not much really scared me 20 years ago when this happened. The story is more creepy than anything else, I guess. I started working at a Burger King in my town, and things went really well. However, there was this one coworker who called himself Tom. He looked normal enough, and most people liked him. I don't know what it was about him, but I refused to work with him. He would give me these creepy dead-eyed smiles and try to be near me whenever he could. I would get nauseous around him, and my manager told me to get over it or be fired. About a week after talking with the manager, Tom disappeared and never again showed up for work. More time had passed, and my coworkers and I found out that his name was in fact not even Tom. He was a child predator who was wanted in Kansas. At the age of 17, I looked about 14. That creeps me out even further. I have many more stories about creepy encounters and various types of assaults from strangers, foster parents, and blood family members alike. This was one of the first though, so I thought I'd share it. Please be safe out there, everyone. This event didn't happen to me, but rather my mom. We live in a pretty nice neighborhood with close to no crime whatsoever. However, in the neighboring city, Newark, New Jersey, things are very different. In my opinion, it's probably the worst place in New Jersey, right behind Camden. My mom works at Prudential, and the building she works at is located in Newark. She always told me about how seedy things were down there, and that she hated driving around there. Yesterday in particular, things were extra scary, and she barely escaped. She was driving to work in the early morning, and traffic was heavier than usual. She reached Newark, and to her left was a Dunkin' Donuts drive-thru. There was also a truck coming through that same drive-thru. It apparently thought it could squeeze through the traffic to get into the main road. However, as it was speeding up to get through, the two cars in front of my mom were beginning to drive too. The two cars crashed right into the truck. My mom was screaming, thinking it was for her, as she was now the closest to the crash. Thankfully, with a bit of help, her car safely got around the wreckage and she escaped unscathed. It's crazy to think that if she was just two cars ahead, she could have crashed into the truck and been gravely injured, or worse. She got to work safely and she let us know about the situation and that she was okay and at work. But the story doesn't end here. Her day ended about 3 p.m. and she was getting ready to drive back home. When she drove to the main road, she noticed the traffic was even bigger than it was that morning. You might think that this was because of the crash, but it wasn't. She had passed the Dunkin' Donuts already at this point. One of the lanes was empty, so Mom decided to drive into it, hoping to get out of the traffic faster. But when she did, she heard screaming and men shouting, "He's dead! He's dead!" She had just heard shouting when she crossed into the empty lane, and that's when she was met with the gruesome sight of a dead corpse ridden with blood on the road right in front of her. And I mean that there was blood everywhere. The men who shouted earlier were dragging the corpse across the street and off the main road. The rest of my mom's drive went smoothly after that. As of today, we have absolutely no idea what came of these two occurrences. We don't know how that man died, but I assume he got ran over or something. My mom is going into work today, and her day is a lot better, but she still hates going into Newark. My name is Reed, and I'm a 25-year-old male. This is about the time I had a stalker at my job at a restaurant where I worked as a bartender. I never thought much about the people I worked with at the restaurant. It was just a job, something to pay the bills while I figured out the rest of my life. I bartended every night, working the late shift. Most of the customers were regulars, old faces, late-night drunks, the occasional couple on a date. Nothing ever really stood out. That is, until I met her. Her name was Clara. She started about 3 weeks after I did, filling in for shifts when we got slammed. She wasn't anything special at first, just another person trying to get by. Tall, dark hair, a little too much makeup for the job. I never paid her much attention, just another face behind the counter. But there was something about her that just started to feel off. It was little things at first, like how she always stood just a little too close when we talked, or how she'd smile just a bit too long when she handed me an order. I didn't think much of it. I just chalked it up to her being new, maybe a little nervous around me or the job. But then it kept happening. She'd linger around the bar when it wasn't her shift, watching me work, asking if I needed help when I clearly didn't. She'd comment on how I made drinks or how I interacted with the customers, even though she wasn't exactly an expert herself. I caught her looking at me from across the room, her gaze lingering just a little too long. At first, I figured I was just imagining it, but after a few nights, I started to feel more like she was studying me. One evening, I was wiping down the bar after the last call when she came over. She had this tight smile on her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're really good at what you do," she said, her voice soft but not exactly casual. "You've got this ease about you." I smiled back, kind of unsure on how to respond. "Thanks, I've been at it for a while." She nodded, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of the bar almost absent-mindedly. Then she said, "Maybe we could hang out sometime. You know, outside of this place." I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't rude, but I wasn't interested either. "I don't really think that'd be a good idea," I said, trying to keep my tone friendly. "I'm actually pretty busy outside of work." Her face faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, no worries. Just thought I'd ask." The next night, she had handed me a folded piece of paper when no one else was looking. She smiled like it was some kind of secret. "Just in case you change your mind," she said softly. "I'd like to spend more time with you." I opened the paper after she left. It was a phone number. I wasn't really sure what to make of it. I didn't want to be rude, so I pocketed it, figuring I could just ignore it if it came to that. But the whole interaction left a weird feeling in my stomach. Something didn't feel right. The following week, Clara's behavior escalated. She started showing up at the bar on nights when she wasn't scheduled to work. I'd be mixing drinks, and there she was, sitting at the counter with her usual drink, just watching me. At first, I thought she was just a regular customer, but then I noticed how she'd order the same thing every night, sip it slowly, and watch me work as if she was analyzing every little thing I did. I'd catch her staring at me when I wasn't looking, and when I didn't look up, she'd quickly glance away like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't have. The worst part was how she never seemed to talk to anyone else. She'd just sit there waiting for a moment when I wasn't busy to talk to me. I started to feel trapped. Like I was walking a tightrope, unsure when she'd crossed the line between friendly and, well, something else. One night after the bar had slowed down, I was wiping down the counter when she slid into the seat right in front of me. "Reed," she said softly, almost like she was telling me a secret. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately." I froze, the rag in my hand pausing mid-air. I tried to laugh it off. "Well, it's not like we don't see each other enough here." She didn't smile. "No, I mean, I really think we have something special. You're not like the other guys. You don't just see me as a bartender. You see me." I wasn't sure what to say to that. I didn't feel any special connection whatsoever. Nothing like that anyways. "I don't know what you mean, Clara." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the bar toward me. "It's for you. Just a little something." I hesitated, then took it. Inside was a card, a personal one. The kind you give someone you had a history with, not someone you'd just met. The note was simple but chilling. "We're meant to be together, Reed. I know you feel it too." I felt my stomach drop. My thoughts raced, but before I could say anything, she stood up and left, leaving me with that feeling of unease deep in my bones. That's when it started. The weird notes, the unexpected visits to my apartment, the awkward forced interactions where I'd try to be polite, but she just wouldn't take the hint. She started to follow me after work, waiting outside the restaurant sometimes, watching me walk to my car. She'd smile and wave, but I'd get into my car as quickly as I could, my hands shaking on the wheel. I couldn't take it anymore. One night after I got off late, I found a note on my windshield. "I know where you live, Reed. I'll be there soon." I went cold. I didn't know how she found out where I lived, but I couldn't ignore it. This wasn't some harmless crush anymore. She was stalking me. I had to talk to my manager. I told him everything. How Clara was making me uncomfortable. How I was scared to come to work. How I was feeling trapped by her constant presence. He listened, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. It was hard for him to believe me at first. But when I showed him the note on my windshield, his face dropped. The next day, Clara was fired. I'd heard from the other staff that she had been let go for unprofessional behavior. They didn't go into details, but I knew it was more than that. I wasn't the only one she had been bothering. Apparently, she'd been sending strange texts to a few other coworkers too, but I didn't find that out until later. My manager called me into his office after her firing. He seemed genuinely sorry about what had happened. "I know it's been rough," he said, "and I just want you to know if you ever want your job back, it's yours." But I didn't want to come back. I couldn't. I didn't feel safe there anymore. Not after everything that happened. The restaurant had been my escape, my routine, but it had turned into a place of anxiety. A place where I constantly looked over my shoulder. No amount of money was worth the constant fear I'd felt. "I appreciate the offer," I told him, "but I can't come back. It's just too much." I walked away from that job and I never looked back. It wasn't easy. Money was tight for a while, but I eventually found something else, something safer, quieter. But even now, there are moments when I'm walking down the street at night and I feel like I'm being watched. I'm always on edge, always checking over my shoulder. I don't know where Clara is now, or if she's even still out there. Maybe she's moved on to someone else. But I've learned that some things just stay with you even after they're gone. And for me, the worst part isn't even the fear anymore. It's the question that keeps me up some nights. What if she's still out there, waiting for me to slip up again? But that's a problem for someone else now. For me, well, I'm done. This was something that happened to me back in the winter of 2017. I live in a small house in the Midwest. Actually, it's really just myself and my German Shepherd Major. I've had him since he was a puppy, so we're both pretty attached to each other. However, Like many of you dog owners will know, regardless of the weather, our dogs need their exercise. So even while it snowed, we went on our walks around the block. I don't have much of a yard, back or front, and it wasn't fenced in either, so walking was our go-to. Our routine was pretty simple. We left around 7 p.m., walked through the neighborhood, I looped around the local park, and headed back home. The entire route usually took about 45 minutes. I was used to this kind of weather, so it didn't really bother me to be out in it. So just like any other night, I pulled my boots and jacket on, and Major got excited as I grabbed his leash. By the time we headed out, the sun had already set and the temperature was probably in the high teens. It had just heavily snowed during the day, so everything was covered in a layer of white. If you're at all familiar with the snow, then you know that dead winter silence that comes with a heavy snowfall. Late at night or early in the morning where everything is still and quiet. I love that. It makes those walks a bit more therapeutic. The walk that night was fine at first, but soon after I rounded that first corner, something began to feel off. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was probably just me with how silent it was and me listening to way too many spooky stories on YouTube. I mean, I was probably just getting myself worked up. But when Major would turn and look around with his tail sticking straight up, that didn't help my nerves. I just told myself we were fine. Maybe there was even an animal nearby that was throwing Major off. We were about halfway through our walk when I had started to hear the crunch of snow being pressed under shoes. The thing is, it was not from me. I would stop walking or change my pattern and the crunching continued. Every time Major stopped, I would turn around and look. The fact that he would stop and move his ears told me that something was up. Dogs always know. But I wasn't seeing anyone or anything when I looked. So what was it? I just picked up my pace and was thankful that Major matched it with me. My suspicions were confirmed as we were leaving the park. We took the same path home, so when I looked down at our prints, I noticed a second pair of shoes in the snow. Sometimes they were next to mine, and sometimes they overlapped. And from the size of them, it had to be a guy or someone with large feet. I was no longer comfortable with this situation. I patted Major, telling him, "Okay, boy, we gotta go home." He knows when I'm distressed or upset, so he picked up his pace alongside me. I was constantly looking behind me, hoping to catch someone, but I never did. Whoever this person was, they were really good at keeping their distance and staying out of view. That only made me feel worse, though. If I couldn't even catch them following me, how the hell would I be able to fight them off if they had ill intentions? I decided to do something kind of stupid. Instead of continuing down the street on the left side, I crossed the right side, not in a sidewalk, just straight up jaywalking, thinking that if they weren't following me, they wouldn't do the same, right? They wouldn't need to do the same thing. Finally, I crossed the street, and in the middle of the road, I looked back to see a guy walking down the street looking over at me. There was definitely a man following me, but was he truly following me? He kept looking over at me, but just continued on the opposite side of the street. This was finally enough to convince me to call someone. I know it may have been stupid, but I had no confirmation that I was being followed. I'm also one of those people that felt like someone always had it worse, and I would be wasting someone's time if I called 911 for something like this. But now seeing this guy, I knew that I had to call. Better to be safe than sorry, right? I called and I tried to stay quiet as I explained to the operator what was happening. As I continued, the guy ended up disappearing. The only place he could have gone, though, is through someone's yard on the other side. Now I was worried that he wasn't in my view, but also possibly made him someone else's problem. I finally made it to my house, but between looking for the guy and talking to the operator, I wasn't paying attention to my front door. I looked over to see another guy looking down on my doorknob and messing with it. Was he trying to break in? Before I could stop myself, I let out a startled yelp, causing the figure to turn around. He had a mask over his face and a hood over his head. I felt frozen in place, not knowing what to do. Major had started growling and barking like crazy, and I heard the operator call out for me. When Major lunged at the guy, the jerk from his leash jolted me back and I started screaming. I felt like I was trying to scare off a bear. I was waving my arms, yelling, "What the hell are you doing? Who even are you?" I tried to keep my voice steady despite my racing heart and wanting to cry. I yelled at the poor operator that some guy was trying to break into my home, and the more wound up I got, the more aggressive Major started sounding. Finally, with his hands up, he jumped over the side of my porch, probably not wanting to walk past Major. At last I saw him, he ran through my neighbor's yard. I unlocked my door as fast as I could, demanded Major in, and locked it, all while trying to catch my breath and tell the operator what just happened. While I was talking, I could hear the sirens getting closer. The operator informed me that they were outside, so I hung up and then met the cops outside. I told them what happened, from the walk, seeing the footprints, and the guy walking behind me, and the other guy at my door too. They took notes and looked around the property, and then the two of them left to circle the area. They came back and said they didn't catch them, but they did check with my neighbor who allowed them in their backyard. They followed them across the yard, over the fence, into the road where he must have been picked up because the footprints stopped right there, but there were tire tracks in the road. One of the cops said they would circle the block for a few more hours before they left, which did make me feel a little better about sleeping. That ended up being a really long, sleepless night. Every little sound had me on edge, and I'm sure Major was the same way. When I would look over at my door, he was already looking over there. The cops told me they would reach out if they caught someone or had questions, but I never got a call from them, so I guess they were never caught. I read about people casing houses, like trying to get their pattern down, and then someone trying to break in while the owner's gone. It was reported on our local news on the Nextdoor app, so it makes me think that's what happened to me. Part of me hopes it was a joint effort and the other guy was just following me, because the idea of being targeted by two unrelated guys makes me feel even worse. I ended up getting a camera that sits in my living room window, so I can at least capture them if they or someone else try something like that again. I was back to normal for the most part, but I still had troubles late at night. I tried to vary my routes more, making them shorter or take a different path to not be so predictable, but it's much harder than I thought it was. My work schedule was pretty fixed and I couldn't change that much. Sometimes I would just stick to the backyard, but sometimes Major wanted to run, so we went to the park. I just try to be better at watching my surroundings, and you definitely won't catch me without an emergency plan. Hey there, I'm new to this kind of thing, but I wanted to share something that happened to me back in January. I work at a 24-hour gas station just off a main highway in the Midwest. It's one of those gas stations that we get a lot of travelers stopping at, but we also get really busy in the morning when all of the 9-to-5ers come in. My schedule is far from fixed. I may work the morning shift for a day or two, then I might work a later shift. At the time of this event, I had been working the overnight shift from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. It was one of my favorite shifts just because it was such an easy night. I read or scrolled on my phone for hours and rang up the occasional customer that came in, but this actually made me change to days. It was around 2:30 in the morning. Like I said, it's never busy overnight. We might get the occasional long-haul truckers or someone with the munchies, but no one that was ever difficult to deal with. In fact, we were even slower in the winter because being in the Midwest, it can get pretty blustery. I guess people just decide to stay home and wait until they're ready to get fully dressed before going out. I was sitting behind the register doing something on my phone when I thought I saw someone run by the windows to the right. The front entrance, as well as 2 or 3 panels on the side, are glass, so I can see the whole front area with the pumps as well as some of the parking on the sides. By the time I looked up though, no one was there, so I assumed I was just seeing things. Maybe my hair obstructed my view or something. I don't know. I just looked back down and continued on. Not long after this, I had run to the restroom, but since I was alone and couldn't leave the front unattended, I locked the door so I could relieve myself quickly. It was late or early, however you choose to look at it, so the odds of someone showing up at that exact moment was pretty slim anyways. It was a good thing that I didn't bet on that though, because I would have lost. While finishing up in the restroom, I had started hearing a banging sound coming from the front. I made my way back to the front, and I saw a woman banging on the glass pleading for me to let her in. She was in what looked like pajamas, some fuzzy shorts, a long sleeve shirt, and barefoot. It had been snowing on and off, so the ground wasn't covered, but it was still way too cold to be dressed like that. I rushed to the door and unlocked it, and she immediately ran past me and started screaming incoherently. Her hair was a mess. Her face was bright red. She had obviously been crying. I tried to get her to calm down, and she said she needed to call the police. I asked her what happened, and she said that she was taken from her home. I was dealing with a possible case of abduction. I had her follow me to the register where we had a cordless phone, and I handed it to her. She immediately called 911, and I listened to her while pacing, not knowing what else to do. I remember her saying that some guys broke into her home and started dragging her out. Then she mentioned that she thinks they were her ex-boyfriend's friends because they kept bringing him up. While she continued talking to them, I saw an SUV pull up into the side parking lot. I looked at the SUV, then at the girl, who gasped. She then started crying and shaking, saying that was them. I immediately went to the front doors and locked them. I was conflicted if I should do that or just let them in and act like nothing was wrong. But I feared the woman might not be able to stay quiet while they were in the store, and understandably so. She started telling the operator they were there, and I watched her drop to the floor behind the counter. I tried to ask her to stay quiet, saying I could take care of it, and she just nodded as she cried. I ran to the back and grabbed one of the mop sets and acted like I was mopping the floor by the front doors. I tried to act surprised when the two giant men pulled on the door only to be met with resistance. I looked up and walked over to the door, trying to put on my best friendly look. I told them that we had to close the store due to a spill, but if they just needed gas, they could pay at the pump. They both stared at me, annoyed. They were wearing dark baggy hoodies and jeans. One of them had their hands in the front pocket, and I could tell something else was in the pocket, something shiny. The other guy asked how long it would take because he wanted something to eat. I told him that it was actually the toilet overflowing, so we had to wait for someone to come in and disinfect. I just hoped he bought it, but I don't think he was. He stared right into my eyes, like a parent trying to force a child to tell the truth. It was unnerving. I broke eye contact and asked if they needed anything else, and the one with his hands in his pockets asked if we'd seen a girl come by. Was he testing me, or does he really not know? I acted like I was thinking for a moment, when in reality I was just praying he'd believe this next part. I told him no, but then said someone did try to stop by too because I was locked. I suggested going down to the McDonald's that was further down the highway at the next exit. Now they were both giving me that interrogation stare. After that, I just told them to have a good night, apologized, and continued mopping. I kept straining to look at them in my peripheral vision, but they stood in place and watched me. I so badly wanted to look over at the counter to see if the girl had gotten up, but I didn't want to give her away. I said something to the guys again, in a way to tell the girl not to move. I think I just said something about the pumps taking all card types, and then started pushing the mop bucket to the back. I waited a few seconds before walking back out with a bottle of cleaner, and the guys were still standing there, so I just smiled at them. The one that didn't appear to have anything on him then swung at the door, punching it. My face kind of broke there, now looking at the guy like, "What's your problem?" He then shouted that he would come back to smash in my skull if I was lying. I didn't know what to do, but then I saw a cop pull in and stop across the first two parking spots and flash the red and blue lights. The two guys quickly put their heads down, flipped their hands up as if waving goodbye, and then walked back to their SUV. I was relieved. I waited until I saw them get into their vehicle, and then I went to unlock the door. I shouted to the cop that those were the guys, and he started walking towards them with his hand on his hip, I assume on his taser or gun, but as he walked towards them, they sped off. The cop said something into his walkie, and then quickly got back in his car and left. I kept the door locked and went back to the counter to see if the girl was still in tears, her face pale, clutching the phone to her chest. I told her it was going to be okay, and that the police were following them now. She cried again and thanked me for helping her, and then handed me the phone. She asked what the men looked like that pulled up, and as I described them, she confirmed that it was the same men who took her. The worst part was she said that she thinks she knows who they were. She then explained how she left her now ex after finding out he was involved in some pretty dangerous stuff and dealings, and he threatened her, saying if she ever told anyone he would have her killed and she would never be found. She didn't tell me exactly what though, but I'm guessing it was pretty bad if you were willing to do that to someone you once loved or cared about. She said that she was at home when they broke in and practically dragged her to their car. They started threatening her, asking her if she told anyone, but she said no. They then stopped at some point, like on an exit ramp or something, and she opened the door and took off running. But based on where we were at the nearest ramp, that meant that she had to have been running for quite some distance in nothing but pajamas. I wouldn't have believed it myself if I hadn't seen her or the two guys. It's really incredible what your limits are when your life may be in danger. I don't know why she trusted me, another male in a place alone, but I'm glad she did. It may have been the one thing to save her life. I stayed with her, trying to act normal in case they came back. I gave her a hot chocolate and paced the store until 2 more officers showed up. I told her she was safe to come out, and only then did she finally get up. She talked to the police about what all happened, and she told them the same thing she told me. They asked her about her ex, but that was when she clammed up and said she didn't want to talk about it there. She was obviously still terrified to mention it. I couldn't blame her either. The cops told me I did the right thing, and both her and the cops thanked me, and then she went with them. And just like that, my store was quiet and empty again. I tried to look up some of the info and find out more, but I never found anything. I didn't know if they ever caught those guys or stopped her ex, or even how she's doing or her name. I wish I did, just so I can confirm she came out of it all okay. And honestly, that's really all I can hope for. Well, that and that her ex did or is doing some time for what he did. I still work at the gas station, and all I know is that anytime I hear a thump on the glass, it always makes the hair stand up, wondering if it'll happen again or they'll come back for me. The story happened about 2 years ago while I was in university working on my degree in biology. I had signed up for a trip to gather samples for an experiment some students in the ecology department were going to run. It required the collection of samples from several sites, so they recruited biology, ecology, and forestry majors to help them complete the sampling in a shorter period. The area my group was to take samples from was a few hours away from my university. There are 9 of us in my group, 8 students and a supervising professor. We got to the campsite in the late evening and set up our tents. One of the other students had brought a big container of split pea soup from home and was also sharing it with the others on the trip. I don't really care for split pea soup, so I declined the offer. Everyone had some except me, one other student, and the professor. Come the next morning, the 5 students who had eaten the soup weren't in the best of shape. They were in the grips of some gnarly food poisoning and were in no shape to hike for 8 or 9 hours to collect the samples that we needed. The professor who was supervising us originally had some rules, such as people travel in groups of at least 2, and we had to return to camp by nightfall. Now, those rules were tossed out to make sure we kept our timetable and collected all of the required samples. We were really just told to do your best to complete the work assigned as long as you can do it safely. That morning, I set out for a long day of hiking. After a mile or so, I ran into the stream that I was supposed to follow. I needed to travel about 4 miles upstream, stopping every quarter mile to collect samples of the water and soil. This meant that I had to hustle and get back before dark. Halfway through the day, I realized that wasn't going to happen. About 2 miles into my hike, I stopped for lunch sitting on a log overlooking the stream. The scene was really peaceful, until I smelled cigarettes. It wasn't the smell of a cigarette being smoked, more so the musty smell of the heavy smoker's car where cigarette butts must have been left to ferment for weeks on end. I looked around but couldn't see anyone. I just assumed that the wind had blown the scent of some hunter or hiker over to me, but minutes later the smell hadn't faded. The vegetation in the area wasn't that thick, but there were still lots of places for someone to duck behind a tree or bush. I was unnerved that someone was apparently staying close enough for me to smell them for this long without so much as a word. I quickly packed up the trash from my lunch and continued up the stream. The musty cigarette smell went away for the next few hours. It wasn't until I arrived at my last sample location late into the dusk that I smelled it again. The woods were getting really dim by this point. Looking back on it, it was a really stupid idea to stay out so late, as just hiking back to camp in the dark would be pretty dangerous even without a cigarette smoking stalker. Having just put the collection tubes in my bag, I shined my flashlight around the darkening woods looking for whoever was giving off the smell. I didn't see anything that caught my attention. I would actually be more correct to say that I saw too many things in the dim light that might have been a head sticking out from behind a bush or someone crouched low in the foliage. I didn't like the idea of being in the dark woods with a stranger who for the second time was lurking near me without revealing themselves, so I began to double time it back down the stream. I had a much better time on my way back even though it was dark because I didn't have to stop to take any samples. Even so, I didn't get back to camp until a bit after 10 p.m. I was the last one to get back, and everyone but the professor was already asleep. I didn't mention the cigarette smell to the professor because he seemed tired as it was, and he headed to his bed in the RV soon after I got back. I headed to my tent soon after. At some point in the night, I woke up needing to pee. I decided to head to the woods to do my business, as I knew some of the other students were still feeling ill and needed the RV toilet for some more urgent matters than just having to take a leak. I walked about 100 feet into the woods, found a tree, and did what I needed to. As I turned to go back to camp, something caught my eye. Somewhere off in the woods was a tiny red glow. I was confused as to what it was, until it flared momentarily and I realized it was the cherry of a cigarette. I stood there for a while watching the red ember glow, fade, then move slightly closer to the ground as whoever was smoking it would take it out of their mouth. Not being able to see the person, I assumed they were watching the camp. I didn't know if they'd seen me make my way into the woods or not, as the fire had been doused and the moon was only half full, so there wasn't very much light. I made my way slowly back to camp as quietly as I could and entered the RV to wake up the professor. I told him about the person smoking in the woods and about the smell of cigarettes earlier that day. However, when we got outside the RV, the ember from the cigarette was gone. My professor woke the other student who hadn't come down with the food poisoning, and we took turns watching over the camp. I didn't see or smell anything else when I was on guard duty, and I went to sleep when the professor woke up for his turn. In the morning, the professor, the other student, and I went to where I guessed the smoker had been standing the night before, and sure enough, we found about 10 cigarette butts on the ground right next to a tree. The tree itself looked like someone had been twisting and stabbing a knife or other sharp object into it, as the bark and outer layers of wood had been damaged and chipped away. The professor decided that the group should head back that day, even though we hadn't collected all the samples we were assigned to, just to be on the safe side. We packed up camp and drove down the thin dirt trail without incident. The second we got into the paved highway though, a wide-paneled van pulled out of a clearing just off the shoulder and began following us. The van stayed behind us all the way back, pulling off the highway when we did, taking the same surface streets that we did, and only stopped following us when we turned into the road leading to our university campus. Everyone was freaked out by this, but it was around 9 o'clock at night on a weekend, so the security office on campus was closed. We decided to unload the RV and call it a night as the van hadn't followed us onto the campus. I offered to help the professor catalog and store the collection tubes from our trip, so it was another couple of hours before I left the biological sciences building and started heading toward the dorm building I lived in. I stepped out into the cool night air and began walking, my professor having left the building in the other direction to get to his car and drive home. It was a couple dozen feet outside of the building, which was now locked, when I was then hit with the musty smell of old cigarettes. I looked around, and about 25 yards away in the darkness off a footpath, I saw the cherry of a cigarette smoldering away. I was pretty scared at this point, but hoped it was only a student or some faculty staying late and having a smoke. I couldn't completely convince myself of this, as the musty cigarette smell was the same as what I smelled in the woods the very previous night. I started down the footpath and soon passed whoever was smoking. 100 feet or so later, I looked over my shoulder and saw the cigarette cherry bobbing in the darkness. The smoker was following me. This creeped me out a bit more, but I still held it together. That is, until I rounded a small stand of trees and saw a wide-paneled van parked alone in the parking lot. I took off at a sprint toward my dorm building. I looked over my shoulder a few steps into my run, and I saw the cherry of the cigarette fall to the ground and a dark shape beginning to move after me. I didn't look back again, but I could hear someone running in the grass off of the footpath. I got to the entrance to my dorm building and frantically waved my keycard in front of the card reader that controlled the door lock. As soon as I hear the soft beep, I opened the door, jumped through the back doorway, and shut the door quickly. I stopped and peered through the glass door. I saw the dark shape just stop just short of the lit pathway. I just watched for a minute or two. Then I saw the spark of a lighter. The light was just barely bright enough to illuminate a shaggy beard and brim of a baseball cap before it disappeared and was replaced with the red glow of a cigarette. I turned and headed up the stairs to my dorm room. By the time I got to my window overlooking the same yard that I just ran through, there's no trace of a dark figure or a cigarette cherry. After that, I didn't see that wide-paneled van again. That or the smell of that same musty cigarette. And I hope I never do. The story takes place in a small town in Indiana a few years before I was born, and my sister was only a couple of years old. Back then, we lived only a few blocks away from my grandparents, and my mother would drop off my sister every morning for what we called grandma school while my parents were at work for the day. This particular morning, she was running late and was in a little bit of a hurry. Due to her being short on time, she made the decision to leave her car running, and she grabbed my sister from the back seat and ran her inside to my grandmother. This was not an unusual occurrence where we lived, because the winter nights got so cold, people would often start their cars in the morning to get them defrosted while they were getting ready for work. Otherwise, the car interior would feel like you're sitting in a giant freezer on wheels. So having done this so many times before, it didn't ring any alarm bells in her head. My mom was inside for not even 5 minutes, and when she returned, her car was gone along with her purse, wallet, and my sister's car seat. My mom and grandma called the police and filed a report, and the car was found abandoned a few miles away the next day with her purse still in it, but her wallet and driver's license were gone. This is important for later. Now, this is where it gets alarming. They weren't able to find the people who took her car for a little joyride until one day my mom gets a letter in the mail with no return address on it. It was a handwritten letter apologizing and explaining all that happened the day her car was stolen. Apparently, it was a group of teenagers, 2 guys and 2 girls, and they enjoyed the adrenaline rush and got off on the high from it. After successfully taking the car, they all went to Taco Bell and paid for it with my mom's cash. While there, the letter explains that this is when their little outing turned more sinister. One of the guys got out my mom's ID and wrote down my mother's address on a napkin before throwing the ID in the trash on the way out. According to the letter, Over the following week, they began watching our house, figuring out our daily schedules and planning a home invasion so they could rob us blind. Fortunately, one of the girls began feeling extremely guilty and uncomfortable with this situation and turned them all into the police before any of that could happen. She then wrote my mother a letter and had her mother deliver it to our mailbox. In the letter, she explained that she felt my parents had the right to know what happened, or almost happened. Absolutely chilling to find this out. A couple of summers ago, my girlfriend and I were camping in Chequamegon National Forest in northern Wisconsin. After our experience, we don't plan to return unless we go with a large group of people. My girlfriend and I are from Chicago, so northern Wisconsin was our go-to place for R&R. We've done a number of hiking trips in northern Wisconsin and in the Upper Peninsula, but never to this area. We're not backpacking experts, but we have been to a number of national parks and have been out hiking and exploring when we can find time away from work. We love getting away from people and relaxing in nature, but this trip made us appreciate the presence of other people around us in unfamiliar places. Our plan was to hike to a remote section of the North Country Trail. The North Country Trail is a scenic trail like the Appalachian Trail, but it gets much less use. In some parts of northern Wisconsin, the trail is very remote, and the only access is via logging roads. We plan to hike 15 miles along the trail to a backpack shelter, spend the night, and hike back to the car the following day. We spent the night at a friend's house in Wasall, and we set out early the next day to the trailhead. As we entered the national forest boundary, we were captivated by the beauty of the thick green forests. I drove slowly along the gravel logging roads as we made our way to our parking spot. While we were driving to the trailhead, we passed a couple of people standing next to a parked truck on the side of the road. They appeared to be hillbillies, as they had a rusted-up pickup truck complete with Confederate bumper stickers. As we drove past, I waved, and they stared back without returning the greeting. Friendly people, I thought to myself. After we passed them, I looked in the rearview mirror and I noticed they were still staring at us. And before we rounded a bend, I glanced back into the mirror again and saw them watching us through the haze of road dust. My girlfriend and I joked about the up north people, but we didn't think anything of the encounter. Aside from those people, we didn't encounter anyone else on the remote logging roads within the national forest boundary. We found the trailhead about 15 minutes later after winding our way on the narrow logging road. There was no one else parked at the trailhead. A perfect chance to get some needed solitude, fresh air, and relaxation. After parking and making sure the car was locked, we hoisted our packs and set off on the trail. The weather was relatively cool, which thankfully kept the mosquitoes and biting flies at bay. We took pictures along the way, and we marveled at the lushness of the forest and the topography of the glacial moraine. After a solid 8 hours of hiking, we found our campsite. It consisted of a wooden backpack shelter and a fire ring. Even though the shelter provided ample space for us, we opted to set up our tent in a small clearing about 100 feet behind the shelter. We built a fire at the shelter fire ring, and I boiled water for our dehydrated trail food. As we ate, we had watched the sky slowly turn dark. My girlfriend and I passed around an Algene filled with wine, and we marveled at just how many stars you could see away from the city. When the fire was reduced to a small pile of glowing embers, we decided to head back to the tent. We settled into our tent and looked through the pictures we took that day. But after lugging a heavy pack for 15 miles and drinking some wine, I was ready for some shut-eye. When we camped and stayed in national parks, I usually wore earplugs. But that night, there were no RVs or other campers to make any noise, so I closed my eyes and just let the noise of the forest lull me to sleep. My girlfriend was very uneasy that night, but she normally had some apprehension whenever we were sleeping away from home. I'm not sure when we drifted to sleep, but we awoke to a bone-chilling noise. It was pitch dark outside, and over the insects in the forest, I heard a dull thud. It sounded like someone was hitting two logs together. My girlfriend and I were wide awake at this point, and we laid silently in our tent hearing the noise again. Our old tent had mesh windows, but the backpacking tent we were using had no window. We could only guess at what was making the noise outside our tent. We initially thought an animal got at our food and garbage bag, which we left in the shelter, but the noise was way too distinct, and it did not sound like rustling through food wrappers or our camp equipment. Our hearts were pounding as we heard the persistent knock in the darkness. Unarmed and terrified, we didn't know what to do. I would normally have carried a can of bear spray, but I decided to leave it at home to save on weight against the wishes of my girlfriend. The knocking continued, but we remained still as to not give away our location. For all we knew, whatever was making the noise had already spotted our tent. After what seemed like an eternity, the knocking sound ceased. We laid in complete silence with only the dull buzz of the insects in the background. Then we heard it. Leaves rustling, a branch breaking, voices. We heard low talking in the distance. We couldn't make out what was being said, but it sounded like a couple of people talking in the distance. The voices continued for a bit, but to our relief, the voices didn't seem to be getting any louder. Whoever was out there didn't spot the tent and decided to leave us alone. We sat in our tent for the rest of the night, adrenaline surging through our veins. At the first light, we slowly got out of the tent. I looked around in all directions to see if anyone was out there, but I only saw the forest and the backpack shelter. We quickly rolled up our sleeping bags and camp pads and put our tent away. When we got to the shelter, my girlfriend screamed in horror. On the entrance of the shelter, the wood was freshly cut. The word "kill" was cut into the shelter wall, and there were a number of axe and knife cuts where someone was chopping at the wall. I looked at the ground and saw scattering of fresh wood splinters. After grabbing our food supply and garbage bag, we got the hell out of there. We were nearly jogging with our gear as we made our way back to the car. I just kept glancing back over my shoulder and gazing out through the woods to see if anyone was following us. We traversed the glacial eskers that we saw the day before, and we knew we were getting close to our car. We were quietly rejoicing as we neared the trailhead. We made it back to the trailhead in near record time, but something was wrong. The windshield wiper of my car was sticking straight up, and there was something stuck to the wiper. As we inched closer to the car, I saw that there was blood smeared on the windshield, and a squirrel carcass was impaled on the wiper blade. Hair and blood was still stuck to the wiper and on the hood of the car. I didn't even bother cleaning off the car. We threw our gear in the trunk, and I sped off without even removing the animal on the wiper blade. As I sped down the gravel logging road, I just kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but I couldn't see anything through the cloud of road dust behind the car. When we got to a gas station by the nearest town, I removed the carcass with a wad of newspaper, and I tried to remove as much dried blood as I could. I filled up on gas, and we didn't stop until we made it to Milwaukee. This was the last trip that I ever took to the woods of northern Wisconsin. The situation is still developing, and I'm afraid for my mother's safety. We've reported it to the police, and they have patrolled the area a few times, but don't seem to be taking it very seriously. If you have any suggestions or theories, I would greatly appreciate it. My mom and I live alone in the rural Midwest. The closest neighbors are about a mile away. Thursday morning, my mom walked to her car to find small pieces of paper blowing around in the grass around her car and a bag sitting on top. The notes are very disturbing and sexually graphic. Some of them imply that he's watching her and that he can see her at that very moment. Inside the bag, there were 2 glass dildos. She's not a very social person. She doesn't have any enemies or even friends that would do this. She reported it to the police right away. One of our neighbors drove by our house that same morning and noticed a man in his 20s with rotting teeth and brown hair walking down our gravel road away from our house. They asked him his business, and he claimed to be waiting for a ride, indicating his car had broken down or something. That night, a man fitting that description knocked on our door, one that we never used, mind you. She was alone, so she turned the lights off and called the police. They didn't arrive for 45 minutes. She said that he was wearing a large black cowboy hat and carrying 2 large bags. He looked similar to our neighbor's description, but this time he was close enough for her to notice freckles. A little while ago, we noticed he had been in the garage and stolen 2 full gas cans. There are a lot of outbuildings, land, trees, and hills for him to hide. My house has a lot of windows. We have begun keeping the doors locked and windows and curtains shut. I'm paranoid and terrified. My mom is mostly angry, but she shouldn't feel unsafe in her own home. What do we do? Why would a person do this? I really appreciate any feedback. Update. I finally got the pictures. It was a long process and they're kind of blurry, but here they are. They should be on screen now. Update 2. Nothing seems to be out of place this morning, but I'll be walking around the property and thoroughly checking before I leave. I've been writing all of this on my phone, so when I get my computer back, I'll try to respond to more of you. I asked my brother to come home today, and he said he would, but apparently she talked him out of it now. I don't know. I'm very upset that no one seems to be taking this seriously. The garage has been padlocked, but there's still a barn, corn crib, and a basement that he could easily access. I tried again to get her to leave, and she flat out refused. She's convinced that because he didn't actually try to break into the house that night he knocked on the door, that he's not really a threat or he'll give up. She doesn't want to be freaked out, and I don't blame her, but it's way too late for that. She's getting mad at me for asking questions, and I know she'd be pissed about this post if she found out. This guy has been seen around town and no one knows him, which is also a red flag in itself. His license plate is from the next county over, but no one got the number, of course. I want to be proactive about this, but there's only so much I can do right now. Update number 3, and this is my final update, by the way. Nothing has happened since those first few days to my knowledge. We're still here and things seem to have settled down a bit. We got a lock for the garage, although she doesn't keep it locked, and the gun is out. At this point, I really think this was mistaken identity, or at least an easily discouraged crazy person. Unfortunately though, the guy has not been caught, and I'm home alone a lot now. I never used to be afraid. I really hate that he took that from me. I'll be sure to update you guys again if anything changes. Thanks again. During my early 20s, I worked as a meter reader in Iowa City, Iowa. A meter reader is the person who records just how much electricity, gas, or water that you've used each month. If your meters are on the inside and you want an accurate bill, a meter reader must enter your home whether you're there to let them in or not. Just to clarify, we've only entered homes if consent was given when the customer first signed up for the service. Customers also provided us with keys if necessary. Entering a home when the owner isn't present is something that I never got used to. No matter how loudly I knocked, I never shook the uneasy feeling that I wasn't welcome. The inside of a home is the ultimate private space. A home's exterior is just the image of ourselves that we project to the rest of the world. But the further you venture inside, the closer you come to truly seeing what kind of person lives there. And if you want the raw, unfiltered truth, head for the basement. I hate basements. I've seen walls that look like giant static-filled TV screens. That is, until I realized it was roaches scurrying across a white background. Cobwebs so thick and dusty that it looked like the cotton candy machine exploded at the Spider County Fair. I've seen rats, snakes, feces, weapons, neglected children, abused pets, homeless squatters, massive hordes, bizarre sexual items, a makeshift meth lab, and even a coffin. There are rational explanations for all of these things though. Well, maybe not the coffin, but there was one basement where what I found was truly beyond the grasp of logic, and that's what made it so terrifying. It was an old apartment house. From the outside, it looked like every other house on the block. I entered the back door and found myself at the top of a staircase. I ran my hand along the wall until it grazed a light switch. I flipped the switch, but no lights turned on. I wasn't carrying a flashlight. A typical route involved 5 or 6 hours of walking, so I carried as little as possible. Oftentimes, I used the light from my handheld screen, but it only illuminated whatever was about a foot in front of it. So armed with the world's worst lantern, I made my way down into the darkness. Once at the bottom, I blindly shuffled across the room one baby step at a time. With arms outstretched and head down, I eventually reached the far side of the basement. I shined the dim light from my handheld along the wall and discovered 2 doors. Each door led into its own small room. I chose the door on the right and I found the meters in the far corner. As I entered the reads, I began hearing noises coming from the other room. Something was moving, and there was whimpering that grew louder the longer I listened. I eventually realized it was a dog. It sounded weak and distressed. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. At this point, the dog was scratching on the other side of the door. I felt helpless. I reported it when I got back to the office, but I couldn't shake the thought of that dog. It stuck with me over the next month until it was time to return. So there I was 1 month later, back within that same basement. At least this time I knew where the meters were located. I shuffled back to the little room on the right, while keeping my ears open for any sounds coming from the other room. This time I heard nothing. I read the meters and started making my way back, but I couldn't shake the memory of that dog. Was it still trapped inside that room? My curiosity got the best of me. I stood outside the door for a few moments listening. Still nothing. That's when I made a huge mistake. I tried to open the door. I had no more than jiggled the doorknob when I first heard it. Screams. Blood-curdling screams unlike anything that I've ever heard. Sounds that I didn't think a human was capable of producing. Short, piercing, high-pitched shrieks, followed abruptly by a low, drawn-out guttural moan that ultimately morphed into something that I can only describe as crying, but much louder. It was all over the place, like some sort of psychotic freeform jazz. I stumbled backwards, nearly losing my balance. I shouted something like, "Hello? Who's in there?" There was no response, just screams. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Still no response, just screams. There was no doubt that I yelled loud enough for him to hear me. He didn't want my help. He wanted me gone. I fumbled my way through the darkened room toward the exit. When I reached the top of the stairs, I just stood there listening. I was trying to wrap my mind around what I was hearing. I waited for the screaming to stop, but it never did. When I finally left, it was still as loud and demented as it was when it began. I felt relieved, but that quickly vanished when I realized that I had to do it all over again the very next month. I reported what I had heard, but nothing came of it. As my return drew nearer, a sense of dread grew inside of me. What kind of lunatic sits alone in total darkness and silence? My mind created endless explanations for what kind of hell laid beyond that door. By the time I returned, I had built him up in my mind so much that anyone other than the devil himself would have been a letdown. But there was no sign of him the next month, or even the next several months. I'd nearly given up on solving the mystery when a stroke of luck pulled me back in. One night, I went to a concert with my friend Laura. After the show, I gave her a ride home. She had moved somewhere recently, so she had to give me directions. I didn't pay much attention to where she was leading me until she pointed to a house a ways up the street. I couldn't believe it. she had actually moved into the same house with the mysterious room in the basement. This sounds weird, but have you noticed anything odd about the basement at this? I began to ask, but before I could finish my sentence, she blurted out, "A crazy guy lives down there." Finally, I had confirmation. She went on to tell me that even though her apartment was in the attic, she often heard him yelling late at night. But that wasn't all. She had actually met him. One day while walking to her car, she saw him standing in the lawn. He stood perfectly still with no expression on his face. He was directly in her path, so she cautiously made her way around him. She noticed that he was staring at her, so she offered a friendly hi as she passed. He had no reaction, except for one unsettling exception. He stuck out his tongue, then quickly sucked it back into his mouth, and then resumed acting like a statue. Thoroughly creeped out, she got in her car and drove away. 2 or 3 months later, I had finally met him myself. I entered the back door like I had so many months before. This time, something was different. There was a light on in the basement. I peered down the staircase. At the bottom, a ragged-looking dog was staring back at me. It was the same dog that I'd heard during my first visit. Then I noticed something else. Behind the dog, I could see a pair of bare feet. The ceiling blocked my view of the rest of whoever was standing there, but it didn't matter. I knew it was him. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I know this probably doesn't make sense, but at this point, my desire to finally get some answers outweighed my fear. I shakily called out, "Meter reader," and started to make my descent. As I made my way down, more of him was revealed. He looked to be middle-aged. His head was shaved and his eyes were wild. He was wearing pants but no shirt. What I remember most was how lean and sinewy his body looked. It had the look of a body that was never at rest. I explained who I was and what I was doing there. To my surprise, not only did he talk to me, but he had actually sounded somewhat normal. The volume and pitch of his voice was odd, but he said the same sorts of things that people typically said to meter readers. I even started to doubt whether or not he was the same man that I'd heard screaming, but his behavior slowly removed all doubt. As I read the meters, he rapidly paced back and forth. He was constantly wringing his hands together and spastically cocking his head from side to side. The longer he talked, the more agitated he became. He began grimacing, and little verbal tics started popping up in his speech. Every so often, he'd blurt out a loud, "Aww," in the middle of a sentence. He was trying to suppress these sounds, but he was losing the battle. I started to make my way to the exit. He followed. His verbal outbursts grew louder and more frequent. I was petrified. When I reached the stairs, I drew our conversation to an end and then said goodbye. As I turned to head up the stairs, he could no longer hold it in. Screams. The very same unforgettable screams that I'd heard coming from the locked room. I ran up the stairs as fast as my legs would carry me, flung the door open, and rushed back into the daylight. A month or two later, I had a couple of friends, including Laura, over to my place. I was excited to tell her about my encounter, but as I was relaying what happened, I could tell that something else was on her mind. When I finished telling my story, she told me about something that she'd seen a couple of weeks earlier. One day, she had noticed lights flashing outside her window. She looked outside just in time to see police officers placing the man from the basement in the back seat of a squad car. She later found out from another tenant that he had attacked someone with a knife. That was the last we ever saw of him. I don't know what became of the man in the basement. I'd like to think that he got the help that he desperately needed, but maybe that's just because I'd rather not think about the alternative. When I was around 22 years old, I had a scary encounter while staying at a hotel for a job. Around 2010, I was working for a traveling photography group that took church directory photos. Each photographer drove separately from all over the place. so I was in Harlan, Iowa at the time. I was staying at a hotel along with other photographers who joined me. I believe there were 4 of us, 2 guys, a girl, and myself. One morning, I went down to breakfast and was watching TV in the hotel breakfast area. Someone was also down there nearby, a guy. When he looked at me, I said, "Good morning," as I do whenever I go, just to be friendly. He said it back and we just had a polite exchange. Something you would do with a stranger you never thought you would see again. He mentioned he was staying there with his team for a construction job. I go to leave and I say something very casual like, "Well, have a good one, see you later." And he said something like, "Could we hang later?" I didn't think anything of it and just brushed it off like, yeah, maybe. I don't remember if it was the same day or not, but as I didn't work until 11 a.m., I decided to go take a nap since I didn't sleep well the night before. We tend to work from like 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. give or take depending on the size of the church, etc. While laying in my room, I kept receiving phone calls to my room phone. I wasn't used to getting calls like that ever, so I just picked up. I would say hello, but nobody would answer. After a few times, I eventually just took the receiver off and placed it beside the phone so it would stop ringing. When it was time to get up and leave, I left my room and I saw the guy was there in the hall. I waved casually, still not thinking anything of it. He asked where I was going and I said I had to go to work. My friend then showed up, one of the female photographers, and I went with her to her car as I was going to ride with her to the church. I told her about getting strange phone calls and she mentioned that she did as well. Later that night, there was a thunderstorm. My photographer group and I stood by the hotel lobby door watching the lightning. It was thundering and extremely dark. There were chances for tornadoes, so we were keeping tabs with each other. Eventually, I go to my room for the night and I hear a knock on my door. I didn't really want to answer it. However, I did, cracking the door to see who it was. It was the guy. He talked about how I said we could hang out, and I told him I was too tired after working all day long and I needed to sleep. I then shut the door. Now, I can't remember if this was the next morning or still night, but I recall him knocking again, but I wouldn't answer. I pretended to either be out or sleeping. I called my mom and started talking to her. I told her what was happening, and although I was scared, I almost acted like I wasn't when speaking with her. Then suddenly, I had a weird feeling. I whispered to my mom, "Mom, hold on a second. I need to check something." I then tiptoe as quietly over to my room door as possible. I look out the peephole and I see him. I then see him turn his head to my door as if he was listening for something. My heart started to race. I then saw him move to the side. You know how the wall sometimes goes in for the doors, so there's like an indentation in the hallway for each room? Well, he goes to the wall away from the room that juts out. I think he thought he was hiding because he tried to lean his head around the corner of the jut out portion as if he was listening for something. I walked to the furthest side of my room quietly and whispered to my mom about how I'm scared. I called the front desk to complain like my mom suggested. I can't remember if I also texted my friend or called her, but she also complained to the front desk about the various phone calls she received. Eventually, we were given new rooms, and the construction group manager was told by the hotel about one of his guys, and that creepy guy was told to stay away from us. I even told some of the church people about that situation, and they all said if we needed to stay with them, we could. All very nice, but still strangers to me, and I didn't trust anyone at that point. I'm not sure what happened to him, as I didn't see him after that. I was a little jealous of my friend because she ended up with a hot tub in her room, and I didn't, but it was fine. However, after that, I was way more aware and careful with who I talked to and what I said. I'm a 31-year-old female states away from home on a business trip. About an hour ago, around 8:30 p.m. here, I had just gotten back to my room from a work dinner. I heard shuffling in the hallway and peeked out of the peephole. I saw a figure seemingly outside the room to the left of mine, looking outward. They were knocking the lighting and said twice quickly, "Hello, hello?" Then it sounded like the door opened and closed. I was like, okay, they must have forgotten what room they were in or something and someone let them in. I walk back to the main part of my room and I hear shuffling again. I look out again and see a figure. Can't really make out what the person looks like, but I see them on the other side of my room this time. And again hear light knocking and, hello? Now I'm starting to get a weird spidery sense of like, what the hell's going on here? I see the figure leave and think, okay, that was really weird. Then I again start hearing shuffling. I start walking toward the hotel room door and hear a light knock on what sounds to be my room door yet again. And I hear, hello? And immediately after someone attempts to open my door. Thank God I had the cross latch pulled over, not the deadbolt though. My heart stopped as I stood there and watched the door hit the latch and fall back shut. I called the front desk and informed them that someone had just tried entering my room and I'm not staying with anyone. The front desk attendant just replied back with,
"That's really strange. I don't have any housekeeping up there."
To which I replied, okay, well, that's very concerning. Can you please send someone up to check around? The attendant then replied,
"Well, there's no manager on duty."
To which I asked if I should call the police instead because I was very worried, as I then started to cry a bit. She then replied that I should definitely do what I thought I needed to do. I hung up and cried for a bit, not really sure what to do. I didn't want to ask for another room because I'm too scared to leave now. 10 minutes later, the hotel phone starts ringing. I was honestly feeling really scared to answer, but I did. It was the front desk attendant, and she said the police were going to be coming to my room, and she didn't want me to panic when I heard someone knock on my door. I said okay and hung up. I just sat there and thought, how do I know if this is legit? Whoever tried to access my room had a key, otherwise how else would the door have actually opened? A few minutes later, as expected, I heard a knock. I looked out the peephole and saw 2 male officers. I didn't ask to see their IDs, which in hindsight probably would have been the smart thing to do, but I was so shaken up and not really thinking. I opened the door and they asked what was going on. I told them all that I explained above. They said it was good that I had the cross latch pulled over because the door would open if not. I then responded, "It's a hotel. What do you mean? What's the point of the access card then?" And wiggled the handle. We were in the hallway talking with my door open just for context. Then they took a pause and were like, "Oh, it automatically locks?" Again, I'm like, yeah, it's a hotel." So then they had me shut the door and open it with the key to test it. Sure enough, it didn't open without the access card. They then said that it was probably housekeeping. I then responded that the front desk attendant told me there was no housekeeping up there when I called. Plus, it was 8:30 p.m. Why would housekeeping be coming by at that time unless I had requested someone to come by? Plus, I noticed housekeeping had already been done during the day because my trash was emptied and the dirty towel was gone. They immediately told me that they thought it was housekeeping and not to worry, but if anything else happened or I felt unsafe to call them. They also said that if I wanted to change rooms, they were sure the hotel would accommodate this. I said okay while crying, and they left. Now I'm sitting in my room crying, laying under the covers of my clothes. I'm sure I won't sleep tonight. I'm also too afraid to change rooms because I don't want to leave this room. I have the cross latch pulled over and the deadbolt locked. I mean, I think I'm safe. Am I being paranoid? Was it probably really just housekeeping? Should I be doing something different? Update. I'm home safe and promptly came down with a nasty bug, slowly crawling out of it. I'm really glad that I followed my gut and reacted the way I did to do what I could to stay safe. I was able to speak with the manager the next day when she came in at 11 a.m. Unfortunately, the response from her was really disappointing, just like the night shift front desk clerk and the morning shift front desk clerks when I checked out. Needless to say, I will never stay in this hotel again, and I will be avoiding this large chain as a whole. So this happened about 7 months ago. I was visiting San Diego for job interviews and staying in my favorite hotel in Sorrento Mesa. For a background, I'm a 40-year-old man and a pretty big guy. I'm 6'1" and a former strip club bouncer. Now, on to the weirdness. On my third night, I was up pretty late after hanging out with some old friends after my interviews. I got back to the hotel around 2 a.m. with some Sonny's Donuts. After eating a few, drinking a few more, and watching South Park post-COVID, I decided to have a smoke before going to bed. This made it now around 3 a.m. So I go downstairs, walk out front to the smoking area by the fountain, but there's another couple who are also staying at the hotel already there. I didn't want to impose, so I decided to just walk around the outside parts of the hotel while I smoked. I walked around the pool, the barbecue area, the basketball courts, and then started back for the side door. As I did, a black sedan drove up alongside me and stopped. The window rolled down and a tiny Asian woman asked if I knew how to get out of the parking lot and back to the street. Now from there, when she asked me, this was literally in a straight line about 150 feet in front of her, so I thought she was either drunk or just blind. So I just politely said yes, just keep going straight, and then turn left at the tree. She then asked me if I could get in the car and show her. Now again, I'm a former strip club bouncer, and this woman looked very much like the Walmart alley wonk. There was absolutely no intimidation factor whatsoever, but for some reason, I instantly felt uneasy. Again, it was literally right in front of her. She could see the road. Also, the windows were all tinted far more than they should have been, and I honestly couldn't tell if anyone else was in the car. I used the smoking as an excuse to not get in the car, but she said she didn't mind and gave me a very creepy smile. I politely declined, and again pointed out that the road was literally right there, so I'd just be walking back in 5 seconds anyway. She again asked me if I would get in and show her. This was feeling like a weird kid/ice cream truck situation. I mean, guys, really, how often do decently good-looking women just drive up and ask you to get in their car at 3 a.m. in a hotel parking lot? I mean, how often does anyone ask a big bearded guy to just hop on in the car under these circumstances? Nothing about this was right. Again, I politely declined as I finished my smoke, and was luckily already standing right at the hotel side door when all of this started, so I just went in. The woman just drove off as she rolled up the window, right exactly to the exit she asked me to show her to. So I told the front desk about it, and they said they'd keep an eye out, but I'm quite sure nothing was ever done or came of it. Just one of those things that really makes me wonder, what the hell did she want me in the car for so badly? A pretty man I'm not, so it had to just be some kind of scam. I just wonder exactly how much danger I was really in. So I'm a 22-year-old male and decided to stay in a Motel 6 for one night in the southern New Hampshire area. I had back-to-back hospital shifts, so it really wasn't worth it to drive 45 minutes back home just to do it again 6 hours later. I checked in around 11:15 p.m. and went to my room. Of course, the door refused to open and the key ended up snapping in half, probably because it was like 10 degrees out. So I had to go back to the office to change rooms and then get a new key card. My new room actually opened. It was pretty clean overall. I didn't see any major issues with it. I tried to get some sleep but wake up at about 4 a.m. to people arguing somewhere in the hotel. I genuinely didn't think it was possible to be so unbelievably loud between two people. This argument went on for what seemed like forever, until finally they shut the hell up. However, about 15 minutes later, I hear someone trying to force their way right into my room. I had both locked and latched the door, yet the door somehow was cracked open and the latch was definitely about to give out. It would have opened fully if I didn't say, "Get the hell out!" Between the cracks, I just saw a dark figure in maybe a hoodie or jacket. The instant I said that, the door closed and the person seemingly left. Now, I would have opened the door and confronted them, but I didn't have my gun on my person at the time. I genuinely have no idea what could have happened if I was fully asleep and didn't hear them open the door. That's the first and last time of me ever staying at a Motel 6. For the love of God, no matter how much money you're saving by staying at a Motel 6, please, please, please just stay at a regular hotel. I promise you it's worth it. My best friend is a veterinary technician, and every year we go on a trip together in the city where a conference for work is. In September 2023, it was in Aurora, Colorado, just outside of Denver. Instead of flying, I decided to rent an electric vehicle and road trip from St. Louis to Aurora. I got an electric vehicle partially because they were cheaper to rent, and I also just wanted to try one. I got to Colorado just fine, but on the second night while waiting for my friend to get out of her seminar, I decided to charge the car in a busy hotel parking lot. I lived in Aurora for the first 8 years of my life, and again after college, so I was familiar and pretty comfortable with the area. The charging station was toward the back of the lot, and even though it was dark, it was pretty well lit. I had been charging for about 15 minutes when a vinyl-wrapped silver and purple Tesla pulled in 2 spaces away from me and started charging, but I didn't think much of it. As I'm sitting there for a few minutes, I noticed he was on the phone and kept glancing my way. Whatever. Guys are weird sometimes, and he wasn't doing anything inappropriate. About 5 minutes later, a non-electric black SUV pulls in and parks sort of diagonally to me, so he's facing me maybe about 50 feet away. The man charging his Tesla next to me went over to chat with the people in the black SUV, and they kept looking at me as well. I assumed this was who he was on the phone with earlier. At this point, I'm getting uneasy enough that I decide it's time to go, and I jump out quickly and unplug the car. Just as I get back in and they notice me trying to leave, the Tesla guy sprints my way, and the SUV is racing toward me as well, trying to block me into my spot. Thankfully with Teslas, they don't have an ignition, so you don't have to take time starting the car. As long as the key fob is in it, you just get in and go, which is what I did because I knew that I didn't have time to panic. I was about an inch from hitting the SUV and trying to squeeze out of my spot. Thankfully, I got out with no damage, and when I looked in my rearview mirror, 3 or 4 men got out of the SUV and watched me drive away. I know that gas stations have plenty of opportunity for danger, but I really felt like a sitting duck at charging stations for the rest of the trip. I'm not sure my adrenaline has ever been so high as it was in that moment. Stay safe out there, y'all. When I first moved to New York City, I thought the hardest part would be finding an apartment. Turns out that was the easy part. The hard part was learning how to survive here, how to blend in, move fast, speak up, and not let people take advantage of you. And especially as a young woman. I'm 23 years old and I had started working at the Madison Hotel 3 months ago. It's a medium-sized place tucked in between office buildings and coffee shops in Midtown. Not fancy, but not cheap either. It gets a lot of business travelers, tourists, and sometimes people who look like they have money but don't act like it. My job is at the front desk. I work the morning shift, which means I'm usually up by 5:30 a.m. and on my feet before the sun rises. I wear a navy blazer with a name tag, pull my curly hair into a bun, and try to smile even when I don't feel like it. The job's alright. It's steady and I like meeting people from all over. Most of the guests are nice. Some are rude. A few are weird. I learned to handle all of them the same way. Politely, professionally, and with just enough distance to protect myself. But I really wasn't ready for William. He walked in on a Tuesday morning. I remember the exact day because it was raining, and he shook water off his umbrella right into the carpet. He wore a long gray coat, black gloves, and carried a brown leather briefcase that looked expensive. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with silver-streaked hair and sharp features. Mid-50s, I guessed. "Checking in," he said, setting the briefcase on the counter. "My name's William. I found his reservation. 3 nights, king bed, breakfast included. Welcome to the Madison, Mr. William. You're in room 914, I said. Elevators are to your right. He didn't leave right away. You're new here, he said. I blinked. I am. I just started recently. You're doing great, he said, smiling. It's nice to see a friendly face in this city. I thanked him and went back to typing. He finally took his keycard and walked away. That should have been it, but he came back down later that day asking for recommendations. Restaurants, museums, places to escape the noise. I gave him a few suggestions. Again, he lingered. The next morning, he brought me a coffee. "I thought you might need this," he said. I was surprised. Guests didn't usually do that. I thanked him, though something about it made me uncomfortable. Still, I didn't want to be rude. Each day after that, he found a reason to come to the desk. Sometimes he asked about the weather. Sometimes he just made small talk. He always tried to turn it personal. "You from here? Got a boyfriend? What do you do when you're not behind the desk?" I kept my answer short. He didn't take the hint. By the third day, he was waiting in the lobby in the mornings before his meetings. He would be reading a paper, watching people, and watching me. "I really like watching people," he once told me. "You can learn so much about them just by observing." I smiled tight-lipped. "Is that so?" "Sure," he said, sipping his coffee. "I've already learned a lot about you, Jessica." That made my stomach twist. I told my coworker Maria. She wrinkled her nose. "That's not normal," she said. "Please be careful." When William checked out the fourth day, I breathed easier. He came to the desk, suitcase rolling behind him. "I'll be back soon," he said. I hoped he was just being polite. I was wrong. 2 days later, he returned. He wasn't a guest this time. Just walked in and stood at the counter. "Hi again," he said. "Miss me?" I blinked. "Can I help you with something?" "I just wanted to say hello," he said, grinning. I was nearby. Thought I'd stop in. I forced a smile. "Sir, I'm working right now." He then leaned in slightly. "You don't seem happy to see me," he said. "I'm just busy," I told him. He left but came back the next day, then 2 days after that, sometimes to just sit in the lobby. Other times he brought gifts, tea, a notebook, a scarf. I never accepted them, but he'd leave them on the desk and walk away. I stopped being polite. I started avoiding eye contact. He noticed. One afternoon, I caught him waiting outside. I left through the side door, heart pounding. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking the hallway through the peephole in my apartment. It got worse. One Saturday, I saw him on the platform at my train station. He didn't say anything, just stood there at the other end, watching me. I rode 3 extra stops and walked home on a different day. The next day, I had told my manager, David. He was concerned but unsure of what to do. "He's not a guest here anymore," he said. "We could ask him to leave if he shows up again, but unless he threatens you." He paused. I felt helpless, so I started documenting everything. Dates, times, what he said, where I saw him. I kept the gifts as evidence. The final straw came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was working the desk and William walked in like he owned the place. "Jessica, we need to talk," he said. I stood up. "No, we don't. You need to leave." He stepped closer. "I care about you. I think you feel the same." My hands were shaking. I picked up the phone and dialed NYPD. I then told him, "You need to leave now." He stared at me, stunned. Then he laughed. "You're overreacting." "No," I said loud and clear. "I'm not." 2 officers arrived within 10 minutes. William, of course, tried to play it cool, acting like it was all a misunderstanding, but I showed them the log, the notes, the gifts. One officer asked if I wanted to file a report. "Yes," I said. They escorted him out. It wasn't dramatic, but it was final. William hasn't come back since. Some nights I still feel nervous walking home. I still glance over my shoulder, but each day I feel a little stronger. Working at the front desk, I've learned how to smile when I don't want to, how to be polite when someone doesn't deserve it, and how to say no when someone crosses the line. Most of all, I've learned that keeping quiet doesn't keep you safe. Next time I'll speak up sooner. It's been about a year since I called the police on William. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Other times it feels just like last week. I still remember his face, the way he looked at me like I was something he owned. That look still shows up in my dreams. But life is better now. A lot better. After everything that happened, I decided I needed a change. I quit my job at the hotel 3 months after the incident. I couldn't sit behind that front desk anymore. Every time the doors opened, I felt a jolt of fear. I'd scan the lobby for him. For weeks, I kept expecting him to come back. He never did, but the fear stayed with me. Quiet, heavy, sitting in my chest like a stone. I moved apartments too. Nothing fancy, just a small studio in Queens. I like it there. It's quieter and my neighbors are friendly. There's a little grocery store around the corner and a park where I walk in the evenings. It's really peaceful in a way Manhattan never was. I started seeing a therapist after I moved. At first, I didn't really want to go. I didn't think I needed it. But talking to someone really helped. I realized I was still carrying so much fear, anger, and shame. She told me that none of it was my fault, and I think finally I believe her. I now work at a bookstore. It's a small place locally owned with warm lights and shelves that go up to the ceiling. The owner, Dana, is kind and funny, and she treats me like a person, not just an employee. I get to help people find stories they'll love. I get to talk about books, drink tea behind the counter, and feel safe. And I never have to wear a name tag again. Sometimes I think about who I was back then. The girl behind the front desk trying to stay polite, trying to not cause trouble. I really wish I could go back and tell her that it's really okay to speak up. It's okay to protect yourself. That being nice to someone doesn't mean you owe them anything. I still check over my shoulder when I walk home. I keep my phone in my hand. I double lock my door every night. That part of me might never go away. I've accepted that. But I'm not scared all the time now. I'm stronger. I'm more careful, yes. But I'm also more sure of myself. I know what I will and won't allow. I know how to set boundaries. And I know that if anyone ever tries to cross them again, I'll be ready. William took something from me. A sense of ease, maybe. A bit of trust in the world. But he didn't take me. I'm still here. I'm still living. And finally, I feel like I'm in control of my own life again. So this just happened a few days ago, and it took me some time to process before I really felt ready to talk about it. Backstory: I was hired for a short trip to Ukraine as a keynote speaker, and decided to book myself an extra night at a Soviet-style 4-star Hotel Ukraine in the central square of Kyiv. The Hotel Ukraine was certainly not up to date, but I thought it could be charming to stay in a classic Soviet-era luxury building, and I honestly didn't mind the old-school furniture that much. I stay in upscale places often enough, and thought, why not try something historic and different this time? I checked in at around 4 p.m., and I thought the room was an absolute steal for its size. I was on the 6th floor with a beautiful view, so I happily left my things and decided to go enjoy my night in Kyiv. Here's what happened. I arrived at Hotel Ukraine at around 11:20 p.m., and I was filming through the window of the cab as I pulled up to the hotel. I'd been filming most of my trip, as I really enjoy making videos for memories, so it was not unusual that I was recording the arrival. As I got out of the cab, I looked around at the people coming into the hotel and got my first red flag. People were ridiculously intoxicated, and one man was literally collapsing out of a car being helped by 2 others. It gave me the creeps, so I took a moment at the top of the staircase and filmed the scene. The air felt weird, so I thought it best I get into my room as quickly as possible and try to avoid any people. I walk across the large lobby to where the elevators are and press the button. I panned the camera over to the hall where you could see that I was completely alone in front of the elevator. Good, I thought. Wouldn't want to be stuck with one of those drunks. As the elevator is about to pull up and the doors open, a man in a Napapiri coat appears from somewhere and indicates with his hand for me to enter the elevator. My phone gets a good shot of his maskless face. I walked in with him after me, and then 2 more other people entered. Another man in a gray sweater and a woman. I get both of their faces on camera. I press my floor, the woman pressed the floor. The Napapiri man pressed the floor, and the gray sweater man did not. We ride in silence for a couple of moments, when Napapiri guy raises his hand and starts stroking my head. He was petting me like I was a kitten. What the hell? I instantly pulled back and said out loud, "Don't touch me." He just responds with, "Okay." I looked at the other two people in the elevator, expecting them to be shocked or at least somehow responsive. Instead, they gave me the most creepy-ass sinister smiles, grinning in a way that looks like they're pleased. On top of that, the unanimity of those smiles made it seem like they were together, I guess. They also don't appear drunk, nor are they standing funny. In fact, they seem totally sober. At that point, all of my senses started kicking in. Every scenario is playing through my head. I think back to a lot of stories that I read on Let's Not Meet and watched on Netflix, and I started coming up with all kinds of messed up scenarios for what could happen next. I am alone in Kiev. This hotel is ancient and has no cameras nor guards on top floors. I tried to not panic, and I could only think about how I had to get to my room ASAP. The elevator doors opened and I rushed out. Gray sweater man follows. I start speed walking down the hallway towards my room. There's a left and right hall, and he follows. As I begin to approach the corner of the hallway where my room is, I make a sharp U-turn. There's no way in hell I'll let him know what room I'm in. I'm walking back down the hallway, and he does this kind of zigzag as I walk past him that I caught on camera. I get back to the elevators and I wait, listening and praying for him to go into a room. Instead, I hear footsteps again. He was coming back towards me. I pretended to get on the phone so it wouldn't seem like I'm totally alone. As he walks up to where I'm standing at the elevators, he lingers for a moment, looking at me, and I start speeding down the hallway again towards my room. I hear his footsteps following me, so I start running. He starts running too. I dashed around the corner and I managed to get into my room before he turned the corner to see which door was mine. I bolted shut and just stand there for a second. I hear footsteps walking from door to door, as if somebody is listening for noise behind each door. There is no peephole. I thought about what to do next, and then I went to the living room where the phone is to call security. I told him what happened, and his first reaction is, "And who are you?" he says in slightly aggressive Russian. "I'm a guest in this hotel. I'm here alone and the man is following me." He cuts me off. "I understand. I'm on the way," he told me. I stood there for a couple of moments. I could hear noises still coming from outside the door, but I was a bit paralyzed. I called back the security. "I took care of it," he says. "Great, thanks," I replied, and then hung up. Actually, not freaking great. This is insane. What the hell is going on? What was that even? Why was that dude petting me? Why the hell were they smiling so creepy? Were they together? Where did they even all come from if I was standing alone in the hall? What if they come back after midnight? He knows the corridor I'm in. It's only 4 rooms. What if this is some kind of ploy? What if the guard is in on it? What did he take care of exactly? I had a million questions just racing through my head. Aside from the logic, my entire body was tingling in spidey senses that I had to get out of that hotel immediately. I thought maybe if I filled the tub and soaked my legs a bit, I can stop shaking. I went to the sink to wash my hands. It was totally clogged. It wouldn't drain the water at all. I went to the bed to lay down for a moment, pulled back the sheets, hair, pulled them back more, crumbs, a sesame seed, more hair and crumbs. I zoomed in on all of this with my phone, which still hasn't stopped filming. I called one of my best friends, MJ, and totally unnerved told her what's happening. She instantly went into action plan mode and told me to call my employer immediately and tell them to get me the hell out of that hotel. I did so, and the plan was to call the reception to get security to escort me downstairs so I can get the hell out of this hotel. This is where it gets more weird. I called reception and began telling her everything that happened. She was very nice and polite, and she first tried to calm me down by saying, "Well, maybe they were drunk." I told her regardless if they are or aren't, being chased and petted is not okay, and that I need to leave because that whole vibe is really off and something just doesn't feel right. Her demeanor then changed. "Don't worry, we're going to get you out of this hotel. I've texted the guard and he's on his way to get to you. You'll be safe waiting with me." Just like a 911 operator, she proceeded to walk me through a protocol. The security will be there in around 5 minutes. He will knock X amount of times. Do not open the door unless you hear this knock." "Okay," I replied. "Let me check with the security and call you right back," she says. A couple of minutes of anxiety attacks go by, and the phone rings again. Security is on his way. "He told me that you called him before and told him what happened. He told me that he checked your floor and found the men that you're talking about," she said. I paused. "Men? As in plural? You're telling me the guard found multiple men on my floor?" I asked. "Yes, he found them. They were just confused about what floor was theirs. He personally escorted them back into their rooms," she replied. "I'm really sorry," I said, "but I have a hard time believing that they were confused about their floor. Confused people don't chase somebody through a hallway." At that point, I didn't even have the energy to unwrap with her that only one of them followed me off the elevator. How and when did that turn into a damn group? I called security not even 2 minutes after entering my room. As I'm on the phone with her, I hear the code knock that the security is there. I ran to open the door. His entire attitude at first is to play everything down and tell me they were just drunk and confused and that I really shouldn't take it personally. I asked him about the petting in the elevator and the chasing. I told him I recorded everything on camera. He falls quiet. The rest of the way to the reception, he spends telling me not to worry and that I'm almost out of the hotel. I arrive at reception. "Masha?" I exclaimed to the woman. "Yes, don't worry. You're safe with me now," are her first words as her eyes darted at the security guard. That was super weird, I thought. "We're going to call your taxi and get you out of this hotel right now," she continues. At this point, it's really dawning on me that this is not her first rodeo. I thought back to the phone call in the room and how quickly she snapped into protocol and how flawless it all went. It hit me that there is no possible way that I'm the first woman to be in this situation, given how quickly she had started to take me seriously, while the guard continued to downplay the whole thing. I called my Uber and Masha and just continued to stand there for some time. "You know, you should have never booked this hotel," she says to me. "People kept saying this to me all day, that it's old school and Soviet style, but I thought it could have a charm as it's on the main square and has an amazing view." I reply. "Yes, I can understand that, but this hotel, Hotel Ukraine, it is not a place for a girl like you," she says. "Well, what do you mean?" I ask. "It's just..." Her eyes fall to the floor and she looks at her feet nervously. "This hotel has strange people, and I'm so sorry that you experienced this. Sadly, I can't control them," she continues, eyes shifting weird towards the guard again. Well, damn. I don't even want to start analyzing what that means. She then offers me a bottle of water. She brings out a full glass and places the bottle on the desk, and once I take 2 big sips of the lukewarm water, I realize that the bottle is still sealed. Well, double hell. Last thing I needed now is to be drugged. I swear when I tell you that in moments like this, every sense of security and safety is out the door. My car finally arrives, and I ran out of that hotel not looking back for even a split second. I already arranged the new hotel while in the room earlier, so I had a safe place to head. It has been a few days now since everything happened, and I decided to proceed with filing a police report. I also requested a refund for that night via my travel agency who knows about the whole situation. They received a reply today from the Hotel Ukraine denying that any of this happened. On top of that, they say they have no receptionist by the name of Masha. They refuse the entire story. Unfortunately for them, I have everything filmed on my iPhone, including Masha's name tag. I'm still pretty shaken up, but I'm sure as hell not letting them gaslight me, especially given that I filmed everything. Today, I sent them an email detailing the whole thing and my next steps, asking them kindly to not make it more complicated and issue my refund. I think that shady things go on in this hotel and I just got lucky. Solo female travelers, do not book Hotel Ukraine. I travel a lot for work. Not glamorous travel. No beachfront resorts or first-class upgrades. Just boring gray suit business trips. Sales meetings, client lunches, conferences where the coffee tastes like burnt plastic. Because of that, I usually try to save the company some money. Skip the nice hotels. Go for the cheaper places. It makes accounting happy and it keeps my expenses pretty low. But after what happened at this one hotel, I don't do that anymore. It was just outside Rochester, New York. I had a 2-day training to run for some junior reps. I was only supposed to be there for 3 nights. I Googled a few hotel options. I saw that this one hotel was about half the price of the Marriott and figured, why not? It didn't look that bad online. Clean enough. Vintage charm, the listing said. The picture showed an old red brick building with ivy crawling up the sides. Cozy looking rooms, a little dated but fine. It wasn't fine. I pulled into the parking lot around 9 p.m. It was already dark. The hotel set back from the road a little, surrounded by crooked trees and sagging power lines. The neon sign buzzed weakly. Inside the lobby was dim and quiet. The air smelled like old carpet and something sweet, maybe air freshener trying to cover up mildew. Behind the front desk sat an elderly woman in a pink cardigan. She had thin white hair pulled into a tight bun and glasses that made her eyes look too big. Her name tag said Marla. "Mr. Miller?" she said before I could even speak. I blinked. "Yeah, that's me. I've been expecting you," she said, smiling warmly. That struck me as a little strange, but I chalked it up to good hospitality. She handed me a brass key attached to a wooden tag that read 209, a real key, not a card. "You're up on the 2nd floor, end of the hall," she said. "Let me know if you need anything at all. I'm always here." She said that last part slowly, like she really wanted me to remember it. I forced a polite smile and thanked her. Maybe she was just old-fashioned. Room 209 looked just like the photos, worn but clean. Beige walls, faded blue curtains, a small bed with a thin quilt. The TV was one of those old boxy ones that belonged in a basement. Still, the bathroom was clean, the lights worked, and the sheets smelled okay. I changed into sweats, answered a few emails, and got into bed. At 9:35 p.m., the phone rang. I jumped a little. It was the room phone, the old rotary kind with a real bell. I didn't even know those still worked.
"Hello, Mr. Miller?"
Came from Marla's voice, soft and slow.
"Just calling to see if everything is to your liking."
"Yeah, everything's fine," I said. "Thanks."
"Wonderful,"
she said.
"You sleep well now."
Then there was a click. I shook my head and hung up. A little weird, but okay. Maybe they don't get a lot of guests. Maybe she's just overly friendly. The next day, I was out from 8 to 5. Long, boring meetings in a beige office park. When I got back, the hallway to my room was dead silent, like the hotel was empty. When I opened the door, I noticed something new. A plate of cookies sat on the nightstand. Oatmeal raisin, maybe, still warm. There was no note. I hadn't asked for anything. I picked one up, sniffed it, and then set it back down. Something about it felt off. I didn't eat them. That night at exactly 9:35, the phone rang again.
"Mr. Miller?"
Marla's voice came through, soft and sweet. "Yup, I'm still here."
"I just wanted to say goodnight,"
she said.
"Did you enjoy the cookies?"
I paused for a second. "How did you get into my room?" I asked. She chuckled.
"Oh, don't worry about that. I just wanted to do something kind for you."
"Well, I'd really appreciate it if you didn't come into my room again." Another pause.
"Of course, dear. Of course."
Then the call ended. The next morning, I stopped at the desk on my way out. Marla wasn't there. Some younger guy was filling in. Tall, pale, bored looking. I told him calmly that I didn't want any more calls or surprise gifts in my room. He didn't seem surprised. "Yeah," he said. "I'll let her know." "Does she do this a lot?" He just shrugged. "I don't know, man. She's been here forever," he said. That night, I locked my door tight. I even wedged a chair under the handle just in case. I kept the TV on while I worked on my laptop. Around 10, I muted it. The hotel was completely silent. No footsteps, no voices. just the occasional groan of the old building settling. Then, there were 3 soft knocks on my door. I held still, waited. "Mr. Miller?" came a voice. "It's Marla. Just checking on you." I stayed silent. Another knock. "I just want to be sure you're okay." I tiptoed to the door and looked through the peephole. She was just standing there in the same pink sweater, holding her hands together like she was praying. She didn't leave for like 5 minutes. I didn't sleep very much that night. The next morning I booked a different hotel, but it was fully booked into the following day, so I had to survive just one more night. That night I kept all the lights on, slept in my clothes, sat in bed with my back against the wall watching TV with the volume low. Somewhere around 2 a.m. I must have dozed off, and then something cold woke me up. It wasn't a sound, it wasn't a touch, it was a presence. I opened my eyes. There was a shadow standing over my bed. Now at first I couldn't move, my whole body just went stiff. The room was dark, but the stray light outside gave me just enough glow to see the outline. A woman standing perfectly still. I jumped out of bed and scrambled across the floor, slamming my hand on the light switch. I clicked the switch and light flooded the room. Marla was standing by the bed, still as a statue. I stared at her, panting, my heart racing. "What the hell are you doing in here?" I demanded. She blinked slowly, like she didn't even understand the question. "I'm so sorry," she just said gently. I wanted to see how you look when you sleep." My blood ran cold. "I had to see," she said. That was it. I didn't change clothes, didn't pack. I grabbed my laptop, my wallet, my car keys, and left the rest behind. Marla watched me as I left. She didn't move. She didn't call after me. She just smiled. I checked into the Marriott downtown at 3 a.m., still shaking. The front desk clerk didn't even ask questions. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. Since then, I've stuck to Hiltons, Marriotts, and Westons. If it costs more, fine. I don't care. Cheap hotels just aren't worth it. Not when you wake up to someone watching you sleep.